To the December 4 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Can y'all hear me in the back there with the microphone volume? Good. All right. The first item on the agenda is normally the minutes. We're going to hold those over to the next meeting. They, through a typographical error, were not in the packet, so we will hold those over for the next meeting. So that makes the first item on our agenda the Stormwater Management Plan. This comes up every year for us. It's got to do with our MS4 for our state stormwater approval. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned before, this is part of our MS4 permit. We have to get every year through ADEM and the state. Kim Burmeister is our coordinator for this project. She also asked that we show a quick video for the Planning Commission members and people in the audience. And so if we could go forward with the video.
You've heard from your constituents.
The water is about a foot from my back door.
The whole river's covered in trash.
Our driveway's been washed away.
There's an awful smell coming from the creek.
All are connected to stormwater runoff. All are important. All deserve your attention. So, how do we go about creating a clean water future together?
It's handled through the other office. We can't change it here.
As communities grow, the need to manage stormwater increases exponentially. Done properly, a well-managed stormwater program simply helps nature's water cycle, assuring the health of our communities and our Gulf Coast lifestyle remain intact and attractive to new residents and businesses. Recently, the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program solicited extensive input to discover what was considered most important to our coastal lifestyle. Over 1,000 citizens from Mobile and Baldwin counties provided input to identify what they valued most about living on the Alabama Gulf Coast. The issue of stormwater runoff plays a major role in each value identified. In 1987, amendments to the Clean Water Act obligated the EPA and ADEM to require urban areas to regulate stormwater. Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, MS4, refers to all stormwater conveyance structures managed by a municipality, county, or other designated non-governmental facilities. MS4 stormwater programs are developed to prevent harmful pollutants from being washed and/or dumped into our stormwater conveyance structures, and ultimately into our waters. MS4s that are designated by ADEM are required to obtain a permit and develop a stormwater management program. Your program must be detailed within the Stormwater Management Plan. It is important to understand that this requirement is vital to the health of your community, that the public becomes Stormwater Smart in order to safeguard water quality and quality of life. Without this education, the value of everything in our lives is diminished, and complaints to your office rise. The requirement states that your stormwater management plan shall include the following minimum steps. A public education program highlighting stormwater. Your education program can include brochures, public workshops, and a website with easily understood information for your constituents to follow. A public participation program to ensure community input on stormwater matters. Interacting with your constituents on stormwater-related committees such as Clean Water Partnership, watershed groups, and environmental boards helps connect citizens to the effort. Illicit discharge detection and elimination. Your plan must include mapping and inspecting stormwater conveyance structures such as pipes, ditches, and detention ponds. Ordinances are needed prohibiting illicit discharges of oil, grease, paints, wash waters, and other pollutants. Construction site runoff control. Your municipality shall establish and manage a program to monitor construction sites for stormwater impacts from land disturbance. Your program must include erosion and sediment control inspections that are documented, and you must have enforcement capabilities. Post-construction runoff control. Your plan will encourage development of post-construction stormwater management to minimize pollutants in new and redeveloped areas. Private and public stormwater facilities must be inspected and maintained. Ordinances that require facility maintenance must be put in place. Participants are required to have good housekeeping in place for the control and reduction of stormwater pollutants from public facilities. This includes street sweeping, litter control, employee training, and management of all environmental permits, such as scrap tire facilities and underground storage tanks, USTs. Industrial runoff must be monitored. Your program must identify pollutant sources from industrial and high-risk areas and determine compliance with all permits. Stormwater program monitoring is required to provide data to assess how effective and adequate your program is at reducing pollutants. This includes sampling during rain events and dry weather for pollutants determined by the permit. Finally, reporting is necessary. Your program must document all steps and report to ADEM annually to verify that the program reduces stormwater pollutants and minimizes impact to our waters. A comprehensive stormwater management plan is a powerful tool to help reduce complaints, improve the health of your community, and ultimately protect and enhance the things your constituents value most. Your program may be managed through internal staff or consultants based on your municipality's size, trained staff, and budget. At any rate, it is important to realize full compliance is not optional. Many states are levying fines that reach into the millions of dollars. Stormwater runoff affects us all on personal and economic levels. It is a challenge you can meet as an elected official, through your work with constituents, and through your valuable community connections. Let's work together to create a clean water future for Mobile and Baldwin counties today and for generations to come. Please visit cleanwaterfuture.com for partnership information and opportunities.
Mr. Mayor, as you can see from the report, we do a lot of those things that they discussed in there. Kim Burmeister, like I said, does a good job with that. We work very hard on keeping our people trained. There's a picture of a QCI certificate that one of our building officials obtained, and so we work very hard on that, and we will continue to do so. It's very, very important to the environment, and as I mentioned in the video, the waterways. But in front of you is that plan that was discussed. Again, this is an annual approval that we request from the Planning Commission, and we feel like this plan is up to date. It's a good plan. ADM seems very happy with it, and we're asking for approval of that plan to transmit to ADM.
Emily, is this it doesn't say public hearing on this, but I noticed one of the conditions says that the public is brought in. Do I need to open a public hearing on this, do you think?
You can, but it's not required at this step.
I will tell you that, as far as this process goes, there are various public hearings and workshops. There's a video, there's a photograph in here where we have a stormwater management workshop or a quality control workshop for runoff and things of that nature that we have every year. And so and then the Environmental Advisory Board has a role in this as well. So there's a lot of, we have taken a lot of public input on this plan we do every year.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Would anybody from the public wish to speak to this item? This is the item brought to us, and the city does have it, and Emily will put it online. I think last year's is online, and this one is as well. If not, I'll go ahead and ask the commissioners to consider this. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
This is the plan that was in the Courier? Okay, yeah.
No, this is not.
Oh, it's not?
No, sir.
Okay, then I'm...
That's agenda item.
It's agenda item L.
Oh,
and by the way, that...
Sleep by then.
Sir, I don't think that's going to be brought up tonight either. I think that's going to... Is that correct, Wayne? Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir. One of our staff members, Buford King, drafted that. He's actually got a final exam tonight for one of his college classes, so I'm asking that be continued. So, because he drafted, he can speak much more detail to that particular plan. So we are asking that be continued to the next Planning Commission meeting.
Okay.
We'll hold the public hearing.
Yes, we can open the public hearing, take comments, but as far as making a presentation by staff, we would prefer that be continued until the December meeting.
When is
the January meeting.
Can we hold the public hearing over the January meeting also, or will we have to re-advertise then?
I'll have to re-advertise.
Okay, we can do the public hearing then. All right? I know we're going to have the public hearing at the end of this meeting. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. All right, commissioners? Anybody want to make a motion to approve the plan?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to approve the stormwater management program plan as submitted by staff.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. All right, the motion passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is ZC 1717. Wayne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a request to amend the Greeno Road Professional Village Plan Unit Development. In your second page of your staff report, you'll see that the building orientation in the original PUD shows more of an angled building. Many of the buildings out there have not been built in accordance with this. They have been built perpendicular or parallel to the roadway. And this particular request is to amend the PUD to show the configuration that you have in your packet, removing that angled configuration. Over the years, this PUD was not developed in accordance with this angled look. It's been developed more traditionally. And the applicants, the bank, they've requested to, again, follow the pattern that's existing out there. But to do so, we have to change the PUD and make sure it reflects the current plan that the others have taken advantage of. Also, another part of this request was dealing with the height of the lights. Originally, they were requesting 25 feet. And talking to them this afternoon, I think they're okay with the requirement that's in the PUD. The PUD contains a maximum height of 8 feet. Just to give you a little background, the ordinance today, if you have less than 50 parking spaces, the maximum pole height you can have for the lights is 10 feet. If you have over 50 spaces, the maximum height you can have for the pole height is 20 feet. And so, when this PUD was adopted 10 or 15 years ago, there's a fence that bordering the property of some residential areas. There's a fence that was required to be 8 feet tall, and the language in the PUD says that the lights can't be any taller than the fence is, and the fence is 8 feet, so therefore the light is limited to 8 feet. And so, but I think in talking with them a few minutes ago, I think they're okay with the 8-foot height of the lights, and they can certainly speak to that if that's different than my understanding. But again, with that change, staff recommends approval of this. I know before we were not recommending approval of the height modification, but I believe again they are okay with that 8-foot height of the light. And again, we're recommending approval of the change in the orientation of the buildings and parking.
All right. Thank you, Wayne.
I've got a question for staff.
Yes, sir.
Wayne, would you please, I know you've been here just a little bit more time than some of the rest of us. How do we go from a PUD that was approved by a planning commission here and a city council with a plat that depicted the angled nature of the buildings into a development that doesn't look anything like what was approved? Were there variances that were approved that allowed for that to happen? Because if they're not, to me, that's the kind of thing we got to get our arms around. Yeah. The notion that this is the ordinance, and if this is the ordinance, then there's got to be a request before anything could be done. And
Mr. Dice, quite frankly, I don't know the answer to that. I had to go back and research each of those applications. I will tell you there is a process in the current ordinance that does allow some administrative changes. I don't know if that was the case or not. There are some limitations to those administrative changes that are allowed in the ordinance, but I have not gone back and looked at those applications to see what the request was, or if there's any kind of change to that, so I really can't answer that question.
Wayne, just one other question. I agree with him. One other question. Looking at the diagram, there's one to the very far right where there's a curve. There's a 25-foot light there. And looking at the diagram, it's an SA light, which is 25 feet, and it's literally in the backyard of two buildings that are next door. Can't we work on that?
Then, up there, that's speaking to that was their original request. Like I said before, they have come to me before the meeting and said that they're okay with the 8 feet, so I don't think they're requesting that height anymore. And so I think all those would go away, and it would be the lighting that they're proposing, 8 feet, would be in conjunction with the fence. So I think it would create a more of a compatible.
Using the shadowed lights?
Yes, sir, I believe so. So from that perspective, I think that the height, what they're agreeable to now is the 8 feet, which I think is consistent with the original PUD in conjunction with the fence that's installed there. So I think that issue's been resolved. And again, staff is agreeable, obviously, to that, maintain the current PUD.
Thank you, Wayne. Is there anybody here who would like to make a presentation on behalf of the developer?
I had, before we go to that, I had another comment or question. Is that amount?
For the staff? For Wayne?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a little slow on that. I'm just noticing, comparing the old and the previously proposed and the current proposed, it looks like the original PUD had all the drives and the parking behind the buildings further away from Greeno, and the proposed has drives and parking towards Greeno in between. It's not, well, there's a drive in between the building and Greeno, which seems to be out of character with something further down the agenda with the form-based code that we're talking about, and I didn't know.
Right, and you know, when you look at, and I agree with you, I mean, later on in the agenda, we're going to talk about parking and this location of parking. However, that's a proposal that we were hoping to implement. I mean, at this point in time, if you look at some of the other properties along there that's adjacent to this one in the same PUD, they have some of their parking in the front, and quite frankly, it's very difficult. I mean, if we had something in place that was in the ordinance right now, that would be a simple issue.
Yeah.
But because the adjacent areas have been allowed to develop that way, it does make it very difficult. If you look in the original PUD, you can see that most of the parking was behind the building.
That just seems like the most substantive change, even more than the angle, is that now we've got parking towards Green.
But again, I think the problem that we have from the staff perspective is that we've allowed this certain development pattern in the same PUD, in the same area of the PUD, and you know, without anything specific on the books, like we're going to talk about later on in the agenda, it makes it very, very difficult to say, you know, they can have it, you can't, unless we had a very, very, you know, specific rule or ordinance in place to address that.
All right, thank you, Wayne. Once again, is there anybody here who wishes to speak as the developer here?
My name is Neil Poland. I'm with Dell Partners Architects.
Okay.
And we have our team here with representatives from Community Bank and engineers. We've been in constant communication with,
excuse me, could you come to the microphone, please?
I was just going to say we've been in constant communication with Mr. Dice and Mr. King, and we feel that we've resolved any issues, so we have no further comment.
Okay. Good. I'm going to open up the public hearing in just a moment, and any questions the public has, I'll write down, and I may call you back up to answer those if they are pertaining to you all. All right, at this time, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak to this item? Yes, sir, Matt.
I have just a follow-up question from Mr. Dias. Has something been submitted? The question we all have with PUDs is we believe zoning does certain things, and PUDs seem to be a blank slate. And I think the question you were asking was, is there something that was approved that showed one configuration and there's a new configuration, or does that matter? I don't know. I'm just curious as an architect, is that because it seems like you would be able to connect the dots from what was, if something was conceptually approved to what was, and I just don't know.
I'll tell you the answer on the, you know, to speak for the old staff, and I'm not saying it's correct, but the PUD would approve the general character, the square footage, and the density, but didn't have an architectural component to it. So the prior staff would not consider necessarily the angle of the buildings as germane item to the PUD. Now, obviously, whether the parking's on the street side or the other side should definitely be considered, and that's not applicable. And I'm not saying that the prior staff was correct, but the orientation of the building, the architectural look of the building, and a lot of those items were not considered in the PUD by the prior staff members.
Well, let me ask you this. Then, correct me if I'm wrong, but is what I'm hearing you say is the location of parking and or the overall configuration of what was presented as a PUD is a minor change?
No, I didn't say. No, I did not say the location of a parking. No, I said the angle of the building. The prior staff did not consider that, you know, a heavy item. Certainly, the location of the parking would have been by the prior staff, but I'm just saying whether the building was angled one way or the other.
I'm just trying to understand who we need to be looking at to make
Yeah.
those types of decisions, whether they need to come back here, or in some cases, even go back to the city council, because they're the ultimate authority on PUDs, and, or is it planning
Well,
director?
but basically, after the PUD gets approved, then the site plans come in, and if the staff doesn't, make a note on, the configuration of the building's angle, typically, your board members aren't going to notice.
And, as far as, PUDs, again, they're designed to be flexible and so forth, and sometimes they're not as detailed as sometimes you may want them to be. There are ways, there is a method in the ordinance that allows some administrative changes. Again, I don't know, if that was exercised or not. There are limitations to that. From our perspective, the way I look, I'm a little more conservative from that standpoint. If there's a question, I'll usually go out and, ask them, just like community bank's doing tonight. If it's not in accordance with what we believe that plan says, then we'll be cautious and have them go through and go through the approval process to change the PUD. Again, it's done different ways, and you have precedent you deal with, some things like that, and not being here, I can't speak to that, how they move through that process. But typically, again, the PUD lays out a configuration and those kind of things, and when plans come in, there are always small little deviations to those plans. It may be, in other places that I've worked, you had a minor approval process, which went just the staff level, but it was very detailed, and it kind of gave you direction on what you could approve, what you couldn't approve, what was major, what was minor. And Art may remember those from the County Planning Commission as well, but also other places I've worked that you had that process that was pretty detailed. And that always is very helpful to staff, helpful to the applicant, helpful to the Planning Commission to know what that role was. But again, from our perspective, we're looking at this as a current plan. I can't, we haven't gone back and looked at any of the old submittals. We're trying to move forward with this process and make sure it's in compliance.
But it's a very good question, something that needs to be, vetted out.
Well, it's just, it certainly makes sense that we would all in the public would understand, and the developer would understand and know who's got the authority to make relatively minor changes, and like I said, ultimately big changes have to, I would assume, have to go back to city council.
That was going to be my question. If the staff determines it's beyond a minor change that they're not comfortable with, what happens next?
Well, it depends on.
What's happening or not. This process.
Is that a zoning change or an amendment? Or?
Yeah, when we're not comfortable with the changes that it's in compliance with the PUD, what you're seeing tonight is that exact process.
Yeah, this is a zoning change, Max. So for this case, all we're doing is making a recommendation to the city council.
Yes, this is a PUD amendment where we're.
And if you look at the agenda, the next item on the agenda is the actual, site plan, basically subject to, the
Right.
zoning change.
What seems confusing is if we're amending the PUD, but we don't know the history of, we don't know what we're amending. We know that the other changes have been made to the original, but not how.
Well, we do know.
Okay.
In your staff report, on that second page, you'll see one diagram on the left and another diagram on the right. The one on the left is the approved PUD diagram for this location. That is the approved PUD diagram that we have in our files.
But so the top building, is that the Jade building that was also built?
This building.
Yeah.
I think so. Mm-hmm. So
But
what you're.
But it's the precedent,
That's
to
what's
me,
confusing.
that is the issue that we've got to wrestle with. Because once the developer and the landowner and the public and everyone understands what the rules and the regulations are, as long as it's not just some helter-skelter variation according to that, then everybody knows how to play the game.
Right. And just to provide a little context, just for example, you have a blank piece of property and you want to do a development there, you want to do it as a PUD. You come in, you submit the requirements for the PUD ordinance, you get that approved, and in that PUD, you might could build, basically a PUD is whatever you can get approved. And you might could build in there changes to the orientation. That could be part of the PUD, for example. You might put in typical setbacks, those kind of things. You can sort of do in our ordinance, the PUD is about a half a page. And so it's pretty wide open. So you get that approved by the city council and you move forward, and if you develop several pieces of property and all of a sudden you say, hey, you know what, that's not working the way we intended it to, the property owner can come back and say, I'd like to amend that PUD to reflect this method of development, or this orientation of building, or this parking configuration, what have you, and that process is in the ordinance for a reason, because things do come up. It's very common to have amendments to the PUD. Sometimes these PUDs are very large developments over multiple years in some cases, and it's important to have that process in the ordinance to provide some relief when necessary, or when things change. I mean, I know when I first started in the planning business, you didn't have cell tower regulations, you didn't need them. And so as things change, technology changes, development types change, and so this is sort of a safety valve to, when conditions dictate changes, you do have that ability to do that. And again, I think the scope of review, I think, for this is this piece of property. This amendment is only applicable to this piece of property here, and that, which is contained in a larger PUD.
And this is, what, 14 years old, the PUD. And your brother was the one that presented it.
He was? Imagine that.
Well, so just as a clarifying question, so is the schematic site plan, whatever it is, included in the PUD, just a sort of a general vague illustration, and then the site plan is when you get to a firm approved configuration?
Well, the PUD on file, it shows we consider it to be fairly detailed orientation of buildings and parking. So I don't, when say a schematic or a rough sketch, we don't take it to be that. We take it to be a site plan. Now, again, I mean, there are some very slight modifications you can make probably and still be in compliance with that. But when you have the whole scale reorientation and so forth, we felt like that triggered, again, that from being minor to a major change, which is why we recommended they go through this process to get the building designed how they saw fit and met their needs, but also it has to, again, has to be reflecting that PUD, again, trying to keep things on track and up to date, so when somebody goes to the file 10 years from now and says, hey, you know what, they didn't follow the PUD, well, here it is. It's all documented.
Anything else? All right, thank you, Wayne. Anybody else have any public comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening. Gary Gover, 300 Lincoln Street, Fairhope. When I looked at this, the diagram of the property, I noticed that along the southern edge of the property, along Edwards, there was no provision for a sidewalk, as far as I could tell. There is a multi-use path that runs along Greeno to the west side of this property, and the private road that goes through the larger development is to the east. So I thought it might be appropriate to have a sidewalk for pedestrians, bicyclists, and disabled people to facilitate their getting along that side of Edwards from the multi-use path over to the private drive. I noticed that there are disabled persons in motorized chairs and things that reside in places like Arbor Gates that travel through those roads or the multi-use path in order to get to the supermarkets and so on in the center to the south. Thank you.
That's a very good point. I think that would come up on the next one, wouldn't it, Wayne?
Yeah, it would, and we'll check into that if in between now and it going to city council. We'll get that vetted.
It'll come up on the site plan review.
Right, that's
yes,
right.
Great. Okay.
So we wouldn't need to add that to an amendment?
On the site plan review, we'll bring that up again. That wouldn't come under the zoning issue. Anybody else from the public have any questions or comments about this item? All right. In that case, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this point and turn the meeting over to the commissioners. There weren't any questions with the exception of the one with the sidewalk, so I won't call the developer back up, and the sidewalk we'll discuss on the next item, which will be the site plan review rather than the zoning issue.
I'll make a recommendation, case number ZC 17.17 Greeno Professional Village, that we make a recommendation to the city council to approve this change subject to staff recommendations and no 25-foot light poles.
I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
Who was the second? I'm sorry.
Ralph. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Next item.
Mr. Chairman, this is the companion application, as we mentioned before. The first was a PUD. This is a site plan approval for the community bank. It's, as we said before, it's on 1.16 acres. I think the building's about 5,000 square feet approximately for the bank building. It's located at Edwards and Greeno Road. Again, as you see in your packet, Mr. King reviewed this very thoroughly. He recommends approval of this application. There are a couple of conditions. As stated on page 4 of your packet, one condition is dealing with the LID techniques. They're asking for a waiver of those. And our third-party engineer, Larry Smith, has reviewed this, and I think they have 6 LID techniques, and I believe that's about as much as they can get from that. Again, we looked at these very carefully, and I think that Mr. Smith agrees with that, as does Mr. King. And so that is the one waiver for the LID techniques. And then the last condition is, again, this site plan be conditioned upon the PUD being approved to show the orientation of the modified plans. I did look at the site plan. I do not see a sidewalk on Edwards Avenue on that site plan. And so if that's something that we want to talk about, we may want to include that. There is a sidewalk on Greeno, but there's not one on Edwards Avenue.
On either side of Edwards, there's not one?
I know on their site plan, I don't see one on the site plan.
There's one on Edwards that goes, east and west, but there's not one on the north side of Edwards.
There's one on the south side of Edwards that runs east and west?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But there's not a sidewalk on that side of the Greeno that goes north and south. There is one on the other side of Greeno.
Right.
But that used to be my school bus stop, so I know how hard it is to get across that road.
Thank you, Wayne. I'll go ahead. This is a public hearing. I'll go ahead and open would anybody wish to speak on behalf of the developer at this point? If not, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Oh, it's not? Okay. I normally let people speak on these anyway, but since we just had, anybody have anything to do with the site plan? We just discussed this item on the zoning. If nobody has any further issues on the site plan, I'll go ahead and turn the meeting over to the commissioners. If you turn to the page C201 and the presentation that the architect has, where the gentleman mentioned the sidewalk, if you look at the very bottom where it says Edwards Avenue, normally we require sidewalks on any commercial building, and we would require one to go from the sidewalk on Greeno Road to the property line on the east side, right there. Normally that's something that we require. It's usually a lot easier if the developer does it when they're building, rather than trying to come back later and get, the permits.
Right here.
Yeah.
Is there, but is there room, and I agree with you, Lee, it would be the time to do it, but on the north side of Edwards, it appears that the development is already in place. Is there enough easement or right-of-way there for
Well, that's why
continuation?
you need it now, because if it's not done now, when will it be done?
I'm just looking further to the east, away from this piece of property.
What it would tie into.
As far
There's
as,
not a sidewalk on that side of Edwards.
Right.
To the east of this property.
No, there's
It's
not.
on the south side of Edwards.
Okay, so it sort of makes sense to cross the street and connect to that.
Okay.
at this point, there's not one on that side, but typically they, at some point it'd be nice to have one going all the way out to the apartment.
Or all the way
Bishop
out to the
Road.
rec center. I mean, there's not one on either side to the rec center all the way down. It
Okay.
stops at Valanta, and, I mean, we just know that it's continuing.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
Did we
Not,
miss
I'll
the-
entertain a motion.
I was looking for the landscape plan.
Should be the last thing in
I don't see it. Does it go back to the smaller scale? Oh,
There you go.
okay. Aha.
Any comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I don't like it.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, in reference to agenda item SR 17.03, request of Community Bank for site plan approval, that we approve site plan subject to staff recommendations and sidewalk being put on the north side of Edwards at this property.
Okay, I've got a motion to approve, subject to staff recommendation, as well as a sidewalk on the north side of Edwards. Do I have a second?
No, but the sidewalk's not going to connect to anything, because the sidewalk is on.
Ultimately, it will not, but eventually, hopefully, it'll connect all the way to Bishop.
I think what the issue is.
I think we're talking about two different directions.
Coming out Edwards
Yeah.
on the north side, this would be the first piece, and ultimately, someone else is going to have to pick up the tab for all of those areas that are already developed along Edwards, probably the city if they want to put a sidewalk there.
The city, the single tax corporation builds a lot of those. Some of that land in there is single tax corporation
There you go.
land. And it's just so much easier when the developers do them on the front end rather than trying to get approvals and right-of-ways. And is it a restricted right-of-way or a regular right-of-way? I could do a PhD in sidewalks and, cost them very, very little money. We're talking just nickels and dimes to do this.
Okay.
And ultimately, I believe there is a sidewalk. When you get further down Edwards to Bishop Road, in front of the
At least it's
AHEPA,
on the
isn't there a
south side of
side?
the street.
It's on the south side all the way through that Rosa Acres.
That's why I was asking if the sidewalk's on the other side of the
It
street.
goes east and west, it doesn't go north and south.
But ultimately, it needs to go to Rosa Acres and past Rosa Acres.
It is on Rosa Acres, it's just on the south side of the road.
Right, but I'm saying ultimately it needs to go on the north where they don't have to cross over twice to get back, certainly. That's what we require in subdivisions. But I've got a motion, do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
All right, any further discussion?
Is that subject to the council accepting the zoning?
Yes, that's part of the
that's right.
staff recommendation, yes.
That's part of the motion?
Yes.
Right,
Yes,
And this is part of,
Also have to go to city council.
right.
correct.
I don't like it.
and this is part of our new parking, with our new guidelines of this, because it looks,
No, it's not, as we discussed
It's
before.
not.
That-
okay.
This, if we were to, if we had that proposal we're discussing later in the agenda for the parking on Greeno Road, if that was in place tonight, this would not be compliant with that. However,
Right.
the historical construction of this PUD has allowed that in the front. To change midstream now, it would probably look a little bit odd with the building arrangements and configuration on the neighboring properties. It would not, it would not fit into the current development method and scheme that's there right now.
Well, it is actually less parking towards Greeno than the development to the
Right.
north, and there's some landscape screening. That's just what's holding me back, the flip from what was originally proposed to this.
Right.
That gets more of it towards Greeno.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. And that's bank number 69, or 70 maybe, I don't know. Next item on the agenda is ZC 1718, a public hearing to rezone a lot from R2 to R4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is a rezoning located at 401 North Mobile Street. The current zoning is R2, medium density, single-family residential. The lot size is approximately 102 by 728. It does have bayfront. The request, again, is to go from R2 to R4, which is low-density multifamily residential district. As you can see from the map, all the adjoining properties in the area is primarily R2, which is the current zoning of the property. When we review this application, we look to the zoning ordinance, and the zoning ordinance provides criteria for us all to look at when it comes to rezonings. That criteria is listed in Article 2, C1E of the Fairhope zoning ordinance, and it goes through several of these. And in the staff report, you can see where we have addressed those from the staff perspective. The first criteria is compliance with the comprehensive plan. And from our commentary here, the R4 invites a little different development pattern. It's single-family, two-family, multifamily. And if you read the comprehensive plan, a lot of these different development types are to be concentrated more at the village centers. And so this is certainly not at a village center. This is in a neighborhood, basically. That's our first issue that we've identified. As you can see on page 3, we lay out basically the locations from the comprehensive plan of the village centers. Number 2 is compliance with standards and goals and intent of this ordinance. Again, we provide commentary that the ordinance is designed to promote health and general welfare and to prevent overcrowding of land. Again, we feel like this area is, again, single family. By introducing a different development type to this, for this property, even though it may stay single family, you are introducing a different zoning that again sets a trend or a precedent, which we're many times concerned about. A lot of times zoning is very precedent oriented. When you do one, you're almost compelled to do the next property a similar way, and so that's another concern. Number 3 is the character of the surrounding property, including any pending development activity. Again, as we said before, very simply, this is single family, it's R2, R4. Again, would allow a much different intensity, a much different use would be introduced in the neighborhood. Again, we don't feel like that's in compliance. Number 4, adequacy of public infrastructure to support the proposed development. We didn't note any inadequacies in the utilities or anything of that nature. Number 5 is impacts on natural resources, including existing conditions and ongoing post-development conditions. Again, we didn't note anything of any consequence on that criteria. Number 6, compliance with other laws and regulations of the city. And again, we did note that in this area we do have some complaints regarding short-term rentals that may have an impact on this particular piece of property, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. Number 7 is compliance with other applicable laws and regulations of other jurisdictions. We didn't note anything on that particular criteria. Number 8 is impacts on adjoining properties, including noise, traffic, visible intrusions, potential physical impacts, and property values. And again, this is where, again, we're getting into a change, introducing a different kind of development to this area, to this neighborhood, which could have negative impacts to the adjoining property owners, and also it could change the character of the neighborhood. Again, they may want to use it single family, but once it's zoned R4, someone can buy it and do whatever R4 allows. You could even assimilate more property there and do, again, a much more intense use than maybe we would expect. But again, by the R4 introducing higher densities and different land uses, again, that area for those different land uses and different intensities should be located more towards the village centers, not in the neighborhood. Number 9, impacts on surrounding neighborhood, including noise, traffic, and property values. That's similar to the one we added property values in here. And this is where I think we get into a significant issue that's we need to note between R2 and R4. R2 is exclusively single family. All you can do is single family homes, which is how this area is predominantly developed. But R4 introduces short-term rentals. You cannot do short-term rentals in R2. You can do it in R4. Now we're introducing short-term rentals, and you see maybe more traffic. Again, you're introducing a development type or a development pattern that could, hinder the single-family nature and use of this neighborhood. It's very important. In some prior experience, we've gone through this a lot, where you have a lot of short-term rentals, and short-term rentals are many times can be difficult for a traditional neighborhood that with homes and people living normal lives, because you are inviting a more of a transient type development there, which brings in traffic and noise, and people come to visit and they want to go to the beach and they get in at 11 o'clock at night. I know that in my former employment with Walton County, we had complaints because we had nice traditional neighborhoods, people live there, and one house became, a short-term rental, and they drive down from Memphis, and it's 11:30 at night, and it's on a Monday night, and the first thing the kids want to do when they come to Florida is get in the pool. And the pool is right next to somebody's house who's trying to sleep and go to work in the morning. Those are just, those are kind of some examples of, that what you could expect. I'm not saying it'll happen here, but it's something that you would expect. Saying all that, again, after reviewing the criteria, staff recommends this application be denied and the request for R4 be denied, and we feel like they have not met the criteria of the zoning ordinance when it comes to rezonings.
Thank you, Wayne. Would anybody here wish to speak on behalf of the developer? Yes, ma'am. Hello.
You just described my property. I live at 401 North Mobile Street, and I bought the property in 2014. And
Can you pull that down a little bit?
And I enjoy living there, and I feel like I've improved that whole area. If any of you've been to my property area recently, it's the unpaved area of North Mobile Street. On one side of me, I have a 30-day plus rental, which is deplorable. I have pictures in the packet that I provided for the zoning committee to look at. And I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you about this area of North Mobile Street and probably other areas of North Mobile Street. We have a B&B that has 14 beds, 7 units, that's been there since 1987. I don't know if it's created any traffic problem, but it's much greater than mine. Mine's only 1. And I also put some of the reviews of people coming to Fairhope for the first time. Also people who come and want to stay on Mobile Street because they visited their grandmother there several years ago. So they picked mine, and it's a high-rated Airbnb. Airbnb is probably one of the fastest growing hospitality choices of young people. It's easy, and there's not any derelicts that come there because an average of one-night stay at my Airbnb is $250 a night, $250 to $280. So I don't really get any transit people. I get the very best people that come, and I point them to Fairhope and say, we're one of the greatest little cities in the country to visit, and I've had over 40 people come, and the reviews are excellent. Now, on the other side of me, I have an abandoned house. It's been abandoned for over 15 years. I've kept up that house, power washed it, and cleaned it up until last September, whenever the owners did say that they would start cleaning it up every other month. And they do have someone that they're hiring, but before that, I did that. And I think that I brought a lot of improvement to my neighborhood, and I try to guard my neighborhood from people breaking into the abandoned house and causing fires on the beach. And I watched out for the neighborhood. So it also brings a lot of revenue because I don't have to pay any taxes. So up front, I have to earn about $4,000 before I ever make any money. So I enjoy doing this. Enjoy having people come to visit, and I enjoy hosting Fairhope and speaking for Fairhope. So I pay quite a bit of money to the city of Fairhope and the county of Baldwin County by doing this, and I would suggest that maybe we look at Airbnb as another way to bring people who would spend money in Fairhope and Baldwin County to our area. So I presented pictures of my place versus the abandoned house beside me, which I've kept up for 3 years. And also I presented the 30-day rental, which I can do right now, and I think I have more incentive to get my house in pristine condition for short-term rental than evidently the people who own the rental house right beside me, which is really a slumlord dump. So consider my request for Airbnb, and I think there's probably other people who have requested this, and I think it's something that maybe the zoning committee could look at as a very strong source of revenue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is we'll have a public hearing. Basically, for those of you who don't know, in this case, this is a rezoning. So the Planning and Zoning Commission simply makes a recommendation to the City Council that may or may not take our recommendation. So ultimately, this is the first step where this will be aired out, and ultimately the City Council will make the final decision on this. I'll open the public hearing in just a moment. I've got 2 people listed. If you could try to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, and if someone else has already said what you want to say, then we don't need redundancy. I promise you we'll hear it the first time. And please remember that we all live in the same community, so don't say anything rude. The idea of Airbnbs, we all stay there. They do help the community from a tax purpose, and it's nothing evil or negative that somebody's trying to do. So please remember we're all in the same community and neighbors at the end of the day. So try to keep your comments to the issues and not get them personal toward any people. I've got 2 people listed. Is this Rob's? That's your name? Yeah, I know who it is. I can't. The writing is not the neatest, Rob.
Yeah, he's going to do it when you're ready.
Okay. And Rob, if you don't mind mentioning your address to
Emily. Rob Stankowski. I'm a practicing attorney here in Fairhope. I practice at 8335 Gayfer Road Extension. I represent several of the property owners down on Mobile Street who are asking the Planning Commission not to approve this request. And before I get into the incompatibility issues, I just kind of want to point out to the Planning Commission some of the problems that have arisen from this. And I want to put this in a little context. I've got to blow up here if I can get the... Okay. Can y'all zoom that up? It might be a little difficult to see because of the sizing, but on this particular piece of property, what we have here is this is what's known as an accessory dwelling unit. And unfortunately, I didn't get here quick enough to argue to the Planning Commission about the changes that you have proposed in the definition of an accessory dwelling unit, but I certainly will be in front of the City Council objecting to the changes in the proposal, because what Fairhope has in place in their existing zoning ordinances is a modicum of protection to stop this very thing from happening. This plan was submitted to the City Council, where my finger is here, for this particular unit located on this particular piece of property. Now, in order to have this separate accessory dwelling unit built, you have to not have any wiring or electrical outlets in there to be able to have a functioning kitchen. Because if you do that, then that creates the multifamily possibility that someone else is going to be moving in here and to be using it. So the plan that was submitted to the City of Fairhope has 3 rooms up here, and they're labeled as game rooms, and it's on top of a garage unit. They have a stub out and a build out for a kitchen in here, but they don't have any of the kitchen equipment. So this is the plan that's submitted to the City of Fairhope, in which a homeowner represents to the City of Fairhope, I'm going to have a game room in here, and I'm not going to put a kitchen in here. I'm just going to have a refrigerator and maybe a sink in a particular area for it. So then what happens is the City of Fairhope comes in and they grant the homeowner a certificate of occupancy. But then what happens is the homeowner then starts using this on Airbnb. And they're advertising on here to come down here and do a rental. Now, an accessory dwelling unit is prohibited under R1. That unit is not even allowed under an R1. This is a clear zoning violation. And what's done next is we have the advertisements on Airbnb. And if you take a look at this particular section here, as soon as it clears up, in November, what was booked on this was clearly less than 30 days. So you can see the shaded out areas in November. The focus is a little bit bad on the monitor here, but The blacked out dates on here are dates this Airbnb was actually booked to stay down here. This is less than 30 days. This is a zoning violation. We have an R1 accessory dwelling unit in which short-term rentals are being used in less than 30 days. And what happens in this matter is the homeowners on Mobile Street, they brought this to the attention of the city of Fairhope and said, you got to do something about this. We live in a neighborhood. It's all zoned R2. We have single families in here. But somebody down here is advertising for Airbnb, and they want to bring people down here, creating the transient, more traffic, more people down here. They don't know who's down there staying. And so they bring this to the attention of Fairhope, and Fairhope goes in and they basically charge the homeowner with operating without having a business license, actually encouraging the homeowner in this case, just go down to the city of Fairhope and obtain a business license, and if you do that, continue your short-term rentals, continue operating your accessory dwelling structure here. And that was what was done. And so this is a systemic problem that the city of Fairhope has. You've got some control under your previous ordinances in this case not to build these kitchens out. You now have proposed a change allowing kitchens to be built out under the auspice that people can move their grandparents and their kids in from college and have an area. But this is only going to create additional problem and additional enforcement. And I'm bringing this to your attention. My clients have asked me to bring this to your attention because they're tired of calling the city of Fairhope saying, we've got zoning violations going on down here. Somebody's running a business in an R1 residential area. And it's up to the city of Fairhope to enforce their own ordinances. Or city of Fairhope is probably going to be sued for not enforcing its own ordinances in this case. This is a bad idea to rezone this. And at least you can give Ms. Sanders points for honesty. The reason that they put on their application to rezone it is not because they want to bring in multiple families, it's so they can do short-term rentals, which is exactly the idea and the concept about you don't wanting to bring in the short-term rentals in this case. It's not compatible with the existing areas, and my clients in this case are asking for the Planning Commission to deny the applicant's request to rezone it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Those are the only two people who have requested to speak on this item. Is there anybody else from the audience who would like to speak to this item? If so, if you'll come up and state your name and your address for the record, please.
Terry Passman, 400 North Mobile Street, directly across the street. I am very much concerned, in addition to what Mr. Stankowski said, that this is a one-lane gravel street. When I moved in, I put in some extra gravel to make some parking in front of my house, and it makes it look a little bit wider there. Ms. Sanders has done the same, but when there's cars in those spots, it's a one-lane street. The people who live there know this. We are very good about giving each other courtesies and making sure there's no problems. When strange cars are around, we don't always get these courtesies. I see this as a potential danger, and again, I recommend that this zoning change not be allowed. Thank you.
My name is Gail Diedrich, and I live at 218 Perdido Avenue. And our entire, well, not our entire neighborhood, but we put a petition together and did it by streets, and the streets in our neighborhood are North Mobile, Grand, Perdido, Seminole, and Tensaw. And we had almost 2/3 of the homeowners sign this petition, and I have turned it in, and thank you. And I encourage you to look at it and read what our petition says, and it in fact mimics a lot of what you brought forward a few minutes ago about our desire to keep our neighborhood a neighborhood and not turn it into something commercial, because again, once one starts, it just opens doors. and we respectfully request that you deny this application.
Anybody else wish to speak to this item?
Make one comment, Mr. Chairman. This property was brought to our attention. The Revenue Department has a different function with business licensing from the staff, from the planning staff perspective. We did write a letter to the property owner saying they were in violation, and we are pursuing that through Kim Burmeister, our compliance officer.
If nobody else wishes to speak to this item, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time and turn the meeting over to the commissioners.
Well, I can say, and I've been to places in different parts of the country. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho comes to mind, and my wife understands the Airbnb thing a lot more than I do. And we stayed in a lake cabin, a guest house of a cabin, and actually enjoyed the neighbors that were permanent residents there. And I mean, yeah, well, I don't know that this should be a zoning issue as much as it should be a business issue. And I think business licenses could probably be contingent on the success or failure of the clientele, perhaps. But I'm just saying that I could see from the neighborhood perspective where, you know, if you maybe thought about people who wanted to visit Fairhope, and we had bicycles, and we, you know, enjoyed the lake, and we enjoyed the area. But I think it works both ways, and there's always two sides of every story. I'm just telling you our experience in a neighborhood like y'all described that you live in, and I found it very pleasant to visit. That's my experience.
I had a question and a comment. I wanted to decouple the rental from the accessory dwelling unit, and that just in the discussion with Mr. Stankowski that, I mean, that's pulling in two separate issues, but when this body voted in support of the change to zoning to allow for accessory dwelling units, it was not a change that would allow people to rent them out, to have short-term rentals. That's governed in a separate, separately from what people are allowed to build. But to follow up on that, if what is the enforcement mechanism when someone is doing something in violation of zoning?
Basically, it's contained in the zoning ordinance. It's a zoning violation. We send them a letter. We can fine them. We can bring action against them in court and so forth. It's pretty traditional language. I will tell you that, you know, the Airbnb is fairly new. I mentioned earlier about back when I first started in planning many years ago, you didn't have cell tower regulations because you didn't have cell towers. Where, you know, this is something that we have to catch up to from the Airbnb side of things. I think we have to do a much better job of, in my opinion, a much better job of protecting the traditional neighborhoods, and then, but also the same token, find ways in locations where Airbnb is appropriate. I think there's a lot of places that they're very appropriate, and some places they're just not. When you have a traditional neighborhood, in my opinion, that can, and in spite of Richard's, you know, recent trip to Colorado or Idaho, you know, that may not be the case. I know in my previous experience we dealt with this a lot, and it was always a problem. And unfortunately, you know, it butted into a pretty serious problem.
And I think the difference is people coming to Fort Walton Beach and the beach atmosphere is a more of a late night party kind of destination, whereas Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is not that way.
Right. Well, and you're right, Richard. I mean, each place is unique, and I think you have to tailor your regulations for different places. I mean, but I think from this particular perspective on this case, you know, irrespective of if we just remove the whole accessory dwelling and even the short-term rental issue altogether, introducing an R4 zoning to a neighborhood, I don't see in any place where that would be something that I could ever recommend, or anybody really, because you're changing the neighborhood dynamics and the neighborhood land use. Now we bring back into it the short-term rental issue. That even makes it even more prominent, where it's just not consistent with the neighborhood. Mr. Stankowski mentioned compatibility. I wholeheartedly agree. One of the biggest issues you look at in zoning is compatibility. You're trying, you know, you want to try to create harmony in the neighborhood and harmony of land uses, harmony of uses and how things are used. And I just don't see that with this particular application. But with that said, I think there are probably places where a short-term rental would be very appropriate. I do think we need to look at our regulations around short-term rentals and the Airbnb, the whole issue, maybe strengthen those to some degree, because there are a lot of places where it may be appropriate.
As you know, I came over here from New Orleans, which is getting overrun by Airbnb. One of the first things that they tried to do in New Orleans was to have people register when there was an Airbnb in operation. And then secondly, they would put that information into the tax assessment on the property, because the property went up in value because of the revenue generation impact of an Airbnb. I don't know why I'm asking you this, but do you know, because you're not the villain, but do you know that if this happens, in other words, if somebody gets a business license, is there a registration certificate that they have that you know that this is a B&B, that they've said it is?
Well, as far as the tax appraisers, the Revenue Commission, and that's the Baldwin County Revenue Commission, again, that's a whole separate entity than the city altogether. And I don't know at what degree they look at these. I'm sure if they knew this was a rental property, that it would be taxed differently, I'm sure, rather than a single-family home or what have you. But I really can't speak to what process they go through and how they gather their information. I know many years ago when I was with the county, they had an issue with condos and people getting homestead exemption on condos that lived in Memphis.
Yeah, that's something that the council should probably have to take up. Just figure out if you have a B&B, where is it, how much money is it getting in, and is it inspected? Is it just sitting there as something that you don't understand?
Well, and the business license process does include some of those things in the business licensing. Again, the business licensing, traditionally, you won't get a business license until you get a zoning approval. We go and say this use is allowed in this district that you're applying for, and that's something that we can look at. And again, like I said before, this is sort of a new area where you see a new trend in Fairhope with this, and so I think it's incumbent upon us as staff to bring maybe a proposal together to the city council and the planning commission and say this is, I think, and we could do some research on other jurisdictions. This is we're not the first, I know. And what is the best practice to deal with this issue, so we can avoid issues where we have neighbors upset and so forth. And again, if we could find the appropriate locations for Airbnb where they are contributing and are a welcome use rather than one that's maybe on the outside.
Well, and I agree with all that, and I think that it needs to be a business entity that's set up maybe regardless of zoning. And I don't know that we're quite ready for that yet, as much as I apologize to you, but you had something to say?
I've already been through him, and I've already been fined. I've been to court here. I sat here for hours. I paid all my fines. I paid all of my taxes, and if I elect to do Airbnb, if this is approved by the zoning commission, I will pay my taxes, and I'll pay them based on the fact that I have a business. I have a business license right now from Kim that I can rent for 30 days. I'm saying that short-term rentals, people take, I have a 30-day right beside me, and it's deplorable. You can come and see it. And mine is pristine, and I keep everything clean because I'm expecting guests every day. And I will, if I don't get my Airbnb permit to change the zoning, then I pay no taxes because I'm old and I'm exempt from taxes. Plus, my husband was a World War II veteran, and I don't have, I'm all exempt from taxes. I'm paying literally $4,000 to bring people to Fairhope. And I don't, Officer Pettis was the first person that came to my house and told me about this. He said the neighborhood complained about the traffic, and he said, I went and checked that, Ms. Sanders. There's no additional traffic from your Airbnb. So, but he said, you are in violation of zoning. And since I had a B&B right down the street, 5 doors down, I didn't know this was a violation.
Thank you.
But
All
I've
right.
already been through, I've been fined.
Thank you.
And I paid my time.
Ms. Sanders, and I really appreciate your, I really appreciate your being very open and, you know, honest with what you're doing. I appreciate that very much. I love Airbnbs. I think there's, you know, it's great bringing people into Fairhope, bringing people to shop at the downtown areas. It's all wonderful. I'm afraid we're running down a whole lot of rabbit trails here, though. Yeah. Bottom line, we're not talking about Airbnbs. We're not talking about accessory dwellings, even though we are. All we need to look at is we've got an R2 area, 100% R2, and we've got somebody asking to be R4 right slap dab in the middle of it. And if I've ever seen spot zoning, this is a prime example of spot zoning. And once it's rezoned, somebody can sell it tomorrow, and it does whatever R4 does. And I think we're talking about all these superfluous issues. And the bottom line is, can we rezone something, whether we like Airbnbs and whether we want to
about to make a motion to
deny
deny the request, Lee.
Okay, I'll be quiet then. I kept waiting for Art down there to interrupt us. It's just going on and on, so somebody.
But my point is that, you know, whether it's R4 or R2, whether or not there should be some business accommodations to that type of use for areas like this. I think it can be positive for Fairhope, but it's not under the guidelines we currently have to follow. So I make a motion, we deny it, and I'm sorry.
Second.
I'll second.
I've got a motion and a second. Back it down there. Do I have any further discussion?
Oh, wait. Yeah, I just want to put my 2 cents in, just for the future of what we will be running into. If this was a neighborhood that was in transition, then certainly there may be some consideration. But when you've got an established neighborhood that is completely already zoned and already established, and everything is the way that it is, to incorporate a different zoning category in the middle of them is as erroneous, in my opinion, as anything we could ever do. And that's true from this point forward, and no matter what the zoning district is. So it's certainly, and you're right, Richard, I agree with your motion.
I've got a motion and a second. If no more further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
But this is a recommendation to the city council.
This is a recommendation to the city council to deny, yes. All right. I'll wait just a moment for the folks to clear out.
Clear the house.
Might want to wait a minute.
Yeah.
2 seconds.
But Wayne, there is.
Now, the problem with this golf hole right here is I can never get the straight. Would you realign these lines for me at this meeting?
You know, this Airbnb stuff, you know, what happens in New Orleans is people who are living in those areas of transition, these are lower income people. And all of a sudden, those houses are being bought for an incredible amount of money. Boom.
And there's certainly there are places for these types of
the Ninth Ward, and places in New Orleans.
I mean, they've got them down
where
on
are they
Mobile
supposed to
Street.
go?
That's right.
Down in Beard.
And then the people who are left, you don't have
Those
those have a
structures
series
along
of
there.
parties.
Some of them are
Another group comes in this week and another group, and you don't know who these people are walking around your neighborhood.
Fine area. I mean, my
They're leaving
God,
on
it's
car
walking distance to them. But if you go and start parking, I don't know, are they in the middle of through the nut section? Are they B&Bs?
They've got to register these things. They ought to set up a process, so when somebody does that, they know where it is, they get a license, it gets inspected so that they know what's going on, they know who the owner is, so they know how to contact somebody. I mean, all of these things. New Orleans is suffering badly from that. The new mayor, who's a friend of mine, just got elected over. She's woman, and she wants to put a halter on the B&B. But that's going to be tough.
That's right.
That's going to be tough. Hey, Art, now legally, if somebody gets a business license, they have a vested property right.
Well, that's true, and I've seen it happen within the county here recently, down in Battles Wharf.
Yeah.
Same situation.
So you get a license right
There's
and then the planning commission doesn't let you do it.
30 days or more, which is what she's.
Long-term
That's
rental.
what, 30 days or more. I got you, thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is ZC 1719. Nancy?
Thank you. This is a public hearing to consider the request of HMR to establish the initial zoning of the tourist resort district conditional upon annexation into the city of Fairhope. This is, they're proposing a 7-lot subdivision. It's about 1.5 acres in size, very similar to what was done at Azalea at the Colony. And they're proposing shared driveways on this. There's only one issue. Well, it's a 7-lot thing, but it will be considered as a, because there are going to be no improvements, and you'll hear the subdivision case next, but since there are no improvements to it, it's going to be treated like a preliminary and final plat. So really there's not a lot of issues with this, except there is available sewer, but there is an issue with regards to sewer, so I made my, to be worked out between the city and the applicant. So I made my condition referencing the water and sewer issue resolution. Also, in your application, or in the case, there are 2 maps in here. One is with the addition of the subject property. They will not exceed, they say they will not exceed, I believe it's 637 maximum density they're allowed for that tourist resort district. And that won't, they're not even close to coming to exceed that.
I can make one quick comment about this, and Nancy alluded to this. This is the rezoning portion of this, but was mentioned in there about the sewer issue, and I need to get up and address that. As you all know, this is the first cycle of subdivisions we've had since the moratorium, I believe. And one of the things that we as staff have been grappling with, and with Richard as well as the utility director, is the issue with sewer. And I'm not the expert in this, but I want to try to outline this a little bit, and then Richard can fill in the gaps if he needs to. But basically, as a reference in our subdivision regulations, we have these specs for water and sewer that details the type and so forth. Those specs, and it says, I mean, it says it in the specs that gravity sewer is the chosen method. But now there are some exceptions to that, and it goes through that in the ordinance, some exceptions to the gravity sewer issue. One of the things that we've been grappling with is this gravity sewer, as opposed to low pressure sewer. And gravity sewer just goes to the utility for the city and the right of way. Low pressure has a grounder pump and so forth that's maintained by the property owner, and it goes out to the street. That's my knowledge of the sewer issue from how it works. But one of the things is we have a set of regulations that says you do it this way. This is the preferred method to do sewer, and it's gravity. We have a case like this one, and also we've had others. We've had 4 of them this month, and we sent out a letter to everybody saying, hey, listen, we have this issue. Tell us what you want to do with your application, because we have not gotten concurrence yet from the utility department, which means the utility department hasn't agreed to the method of how the sewage was going to be disposed of, because we feel like it's inconsistent with those specifications contained in our subregs. And that has been a bit of a difficult issue, and Richard's been working through this issue, but basically we have what appears to be a process where we've allowed in some cases low pressure, and now there is a method you go through when you do analysis where there is an exception to the gravity based on a certain standard and certain things that's required for you to work that process and show it to the city, determine whether that is an economic hardship or not. But we have some of these where they understand the issue, they're not happy about it, they're working through it, but they've asked to be continued. This one has asked to stay on the agenda. Now, in our opinion, to deviate from that specs and standards that's in the subregs, it has to be done through a waiver process. In our subregs, we have a waiver process, and it's its own section, and it goes through the criteria and so forth. But the key thing for that waiver process is it has to be advertised as a waiver on the initial application, on the initial advertisement. In this particular case, that waiver was not advertised. So, so I just want to make that known to everybody. I want to make you aware that this is an issue that we've been working through, and it's a difficult issue because, you know, you're talking about methods of sewer collection and transmission. It's very, very important for the city and also for the developer and the property owner. So I want to just make that known, and Richard may want to elaborate more when the time comes, but I just want to make sure that that issue is out there. The issue in front of you right now is a zoning issue. The next issue is, again, the plat, which brings in the sewer issue, and then we have another one later on the agenda from the colony as well. That's 73 lots that has a similar issue as this.
Well, can I ask him? It begs the question of what we talked about earlier in this meeting, whereby you've got rules, regulations, ordinances, or whatever. They have been obviously not necessarily adhered to in the past, which has set a precedent that keeps us from right now being able to get our arms around it. Personally, what I'd like to see is maybe a break from the past to where if it's on the books and it's an ordinance, then by darn we need to follow that to the letter. And if there is an exception that is permitted, and that exception it falls within a given case, then so be it. They can ask for it. But just to say, well, that was the way it was always done, does a number of things. First of all, nobody gets treated fairly. Nobody knows how to play by the rules, and nobody, whether it's a developer or landowner or the public, knows which direction they need to go in whatever the issue is. In this case, it's a sewer. Now, so with that in mind, let me be sure I understand. You're telling us that we have basically an ordinance that stipulates that the method for sewer in the city is gravity.
And again, I'll defer to Richard for the details of that, but I do know that the preferred method of sewer collection through the specs for the city of Fairhope Utilities is the gravity sewer system. Is that accurate, Richard?
That's correct. But wait. But now you're playing with words, you know, because now all of a sudden preferred doesn't necessarily mean this is what it is. Unequivocally, this is what it is. Preferred means, well, we would like for you to do that, but maybe there's something else that we would approve.
Well, this is the way it's written, and Richard can help me out here if he needs to. It says it's gravity, but there is an out for gravity, and Richard can go through the details of that. So it says it's gravity unless. Okay. And the unless is the important part, I think, that we need to talk about.
And Richard, if you're going to answer, then the question that I had for this meeting had to do with the sewer system being basically overtaxed at the moment, and according to my calculations, if we were to hear them all tonight, there are 140 lots that are up for approval in these subdivisions. How many months can we keep doing this? And this kind of goes back to the school issue. How many children can your school system support for every subdivision that we continue to approve?
Well, I will say, addressing the current transmission and rehabilitation efforts of the wastewater system that will try to correct the inflow and infiltration problems and allow the transmission capacity to be upgraded. Having gravity systems can help allow us to grow at a moderate rate if we're able to utilize gravity and turn those systems off during our peak flow requirements during storm events. So that there's a benefit to that. But getting back to your first question, paragraph 8 of the Division 2, which is design criteria, in this resolution we're going to talk about at the end of the meeting, the design criteria is what the state, in having subdivision regulations at all, is about the Planning Commission being able to decide what standard and level of service you're going to be able to require people as they develop property. And it's not to put any kind of restrictions necessarily on the developer. It's to protect the future homeowners that are going to buy property. That's why you have standards, and I'm sure from a planning standpoint you'd recognize that. And we have them all over the place. We have parking requirements, we have height requirements, we have right-of-way widths, we have every kind of standard you can imagine. But the first sentence of paragraph 8, which is the design criteria, states sanitary sewer collection systems for multiple customers shall be gravity systems in accordance with the standard specification parameters.
It says shall.
Shall be.
That's enough said right there.
I'm sorry?
There's another part of the ordinance, not read.
Wayne asked about the design criteria. He asked if it was preferred or not, and that's the answer to that question.
And on this particular case, let me just clear this up. They filled out the forms, but because they were proposing an alternative, they put NA. So at this point on these, the Camellia and the Battles Trace site, both of those are missing the data that he needs to evaluate his decision, because they put NA on those.
So my question would be, based on what Wayne said a second ago, if you consider this as a waiver without it being advertised as a waiver, is this something we can even consider tonight and vote on?
And I would tell you, and again, I'll defer to Mr. Watson, but from my knowledge, I would say no, we can't.
On any of these items that have been presented on this project?
The way I read the ordinance, and basically it says if you want a waiver from any part of this ordinance, you have to get a waiver. And from my understanding, the design criteria is it's referred to in the subregs, which again brings it into by reference, and the deviation from that would require a waiver. That's my understanding, and if I'm wrong, Ken, please correct me.
Question.
Whether we
basically dictates a denial.
Well, would it dictate a denial when the staff recommendation is to approve, subject to the water and sewer issue, infrastructure issue being resolved between the applicant and the city of Fairhope Water and Sewer Department?
But Lee, what I'm telling you is that
would that allow an approval subject to the water and sewer department being happy with the design? In other words, if they put a gravity sewer lift station in there, then hallelujah. If not, you're denied.
I wonder whether if they come to us as a planning commission for an approval of a subdivision and we've got staff's recommendation, then if we have an issue where it's subject to someone in staff having to make that decision himself, why would it not be dealt with up front? I don't like the idea of dumping it back on Richard.
And I was going to say, I would much rather offer any opinion about a waiver or any other consideration. And the requirements that go further into here is cost prohibitive, which is one of the requirements that you would want to look at different systems. Shall be defined as a condition where the estimated pressure system, shall be as the cost of gravity sanitary sewer system is more than 500% of the cost of the low pressure system. That's one of the criteria for that.
Now, if I can just make sure I clarify, this action right now we're talking about is a zoning change. There's no reason the zoning change can't go forward.
That's right.
The subsequent application is the subdivision, which is again where that comes into play. This is just the zoning. So this you can recommend the zoning change. Our issue is more with the subdivision.
Right.
Okay. Would you like to speak on behalf of the subdivision, or on behalf of the zoning for the developer?
Good evening, Planning Commission members. I want to.
Excuse me, what's your name?
My name is Tim Lawley. I'm with HMR, and I'm representing the developer tonight. I want to try to clarify a little bit of what all this discussion's been about the sewer. We submitted the requested forms, and as he just stated, the criteria, if you demonstrate that low pressure is an exceedance of 500% of the cost of gravity, then it allows for you to use low pressure. In my opinion, that use is allowed without a waiver. I don't see anything in there that says you have to have a waiver. We submitted the forms as requested, showing that it was well over 500%. I didn't receive any comments back from the city until the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, and just said that my application was deemed incomplete. No specific comments why it was deemed incomplete. And then I received a subsequent email the following week asking if I wanted to withdraw my application. And so, I said no, that I didn't.
I don't know that I saw a cost estimate that showed a gravity system that was laid out on your plan that was able to even come up with the proper cost for that.
It was itemized in the cost estimate as the example that was provided to us. This is the first time in the 13 years I've been doing this that we've even been asked to do this. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent.
That's right.
I'm just saying that this is the first go-round, so I'm not aware of what's fully expected, but we submitted it, several weeks went by with no comments, and then, just kind of out of the blue, we got an email saying our application was incomplete. And our intent is not to stand up here and argue it tonight or get into all the details tonight, and we fully intend to work out this issue with the city of Fairhope. And if it's deemed something that needs to be, that we need to wait till next month, that's fine. I kind of came into this meeting, I saw the staff report that said we were recommended for approval contingent. I hadn't really gotten much other feedback, so I didn't think that this was going to become this big of an issue this evening. So I just wanted to let you know where we're coming from.
Well, and one more time, this doesn't have anything to do with HMR or you or anybody else, but certainly there appear to be some issues that this planning commission is going to have to get their arms around, so that everyone knows how to play the game. And if this is one of them, then so be it. I guess we I can only speak for myself. I'd ask that you be patient, let y'all be a little bit patient with us, and let's figure it out. We do it as fast as we possibly can.
And we are, and I would like to add that too. We do have a meeting tentatively scheduled for next week to meet with Richard. I don't know if you got the email.
I'll be available Tuesday.
Okay. So me and myself, Richard, and the owner are going to meet next Tuesday to discuss both this and the project that's coming up on item, I'm looking for it, item H.
1729?
Yes.
Is that you?
That's us as well.
Okay.
And that's kind of a same issue, but with a little bit different variables.
Mr. Chairman, are we still going with the zoning?
Well, my question is this, the ZC 1719, well, I guess what I'm asking, they've got the zoning and then they've got the subdivision.
Well, there's an
Will their subdivision request go to the city council the same?
No, it will not. And that's what I'm saying, the zoning change, this application in front of us right now, this is just a zoning change application. I don't see how this would affect anything to do with the sewer. I mean, because, and really, the subdivision application really is going to be dependent upon the zoning change as well. So there's no reason why this can't go forward. I will tell you that the ones dealing with plats, I would recommend, if Tim's in agreement with that we, those, again, be held over until we can sort of, sort our way through the specs that we have in the subregs.
The reason I included it was because adequacy of public infrastructure is a criteria, so.
Yeah, and as what Nancy said, the reason why she included it is she's right, that part of the criteria does deal with public infrastructure as part of the rezoning criteria, so I think that's germane to this issue, but I think that either way it will be sewered, gravity, or whatever other method. But again, I think that there's no reason why this would need to be held because of this issue.
Okay. In that case, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing, and this will stick to the subject of the rezoning. We can have committee meetings later on to discuss the sewage. I have Tony Gentle listed to speak on this item.
Actually, sir, I'm concerned about this subdivision more than the change in zoning.
Okay. We're going to do, the subdivision will come back at another date, so that should wait till later, sir. I've got, if anybody, I have Ray Hamley, Effick Thompson, Anna Luce, David Lemons, Shelley West, and Ann Miller. If anyone wishes to speak to the zoning, this is just whether or not to bring the rezoning in. This has nothing to do with the actual subdivision.
So, just to make sure, you are going to be another meeting?
The zoning will be tabled until next month. Yes, sir.
The
The subdivision will,
Subdivision.
the subdivision, the zoning's going to be vetted out right now. The subdivision will be brought back next month.
Additional notifications will be mailed out again.
It'll be next month regardless. You get it if you're within 300 feet.
Or is that going to change within 300 feet?
5 feet.
Yeah.
I'm 20 feet.
Okay.
As far as the zoning, we send out notifications based on the tax records. So if where that tax record shows as your address, that's where that's going. As far as not getting notification, yeah, it's certified mail and we get return receipts.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm Ray Hammock. I'm president of the Watershed Homeowners Association. And to me, it's hard to separate the zoning from the plat, but I will try to do my best. I was alerted by a principal of the Ashurst Niemeyer real estate firm that when you change to tourist resort district, that anything goes as far as short-term rental. And so we would request that you deny changing the zoning to tourist resort. In the 2 minutes of preparation that I had, I don't know that I did enough research on exactly what that means, so I do have a question, but I agree with you. Just because it's been done wrong in the past doesn't mean you keep doing it wrong now. So I commend you guys for getting together on the sewage situation. As a homeowner in the area, I feel a little bit like David going up against the Goliath when I go up against RSA. But we do request that you deny this zoning change.
Anybody else wish to speak to this item? Matt?
I'd like to offer that there's a conversation that's going to go on in the next 30 days for this to be heard. I'd like to offer some commentary about the 4 cases that had low-pressure sewer right at their property line. I'm talking about from me to you from it, that the city owns and is operating. And I thought, well, maybe there's some technical things I'm not understanding. So I'd like to go through a couple of thoughts. The low-pressure sewer that exists is probably the most low-impact way to service an existing property. It's there. A lot of people have thoughts about it, but let's realize it's the easiest, low-cost way to get sewer to somebody. We've heard a lot in our town about affordable housing, and I brought you all an article that I'm going to let Rebecca teach you how to pronounce this guy's name. But it's a real 2-page article, real quick, and it describes the biggest component. The biggest detriment to low-cost housing or affordable housing is the embedded cost of the lots. And the embedded cost of the lots come from all the infrastructure requirements. And it further states in this article, the last 2 paragraphs are very good. Anybody that uses utility regulation or slow down on permitting is just going to exacerbate the problems. It's a pretty clear article, and it tells me that's about what we're doing with this, in effect, of low-pressure sewer moratorium. It also explains how McMansions occur. It explains how sprawl happens. It's a great little article in 2 pages. It really hammers what y'all are talking about. I'd like to say that I think low-pressure sewer is a component of affordable housing. If you
let me ask you this, Mike. If they've got 7 lots and 78 lots coming up for a total of 85 lots, right, and a lift station costs 70 to 80,000. Let's even double that to say 140,000. Well, if you've got 85 lots and you're going to require each house to have a grinder pump, those things are $3,000–4,000 a piece. There's $250,000, $3,000 per house versus $1,000. How does that make the house more affordable?
No, well, let me finish my discussion, please. These small subdivisions, and there were 3 of them in front of you this month. This one was pulled. These large ones, the math doesn't work. Art started tonight say the regs are the regs. The regs are crystal clear about this 500% thing. It's not any shenanigans. It's black and white law. Our engineers spent a lot of time, 6 sewer designs, trying to demonstrate we met it. The requirement, which I'll call a gravity bias for these 6-lot subdivisions, is crazy. 74 lots, that's obviously probably going to be a gravity thing. I don't know. There may be low pressure right there. I don't know. But what I want to illustrate to you, just for y'all to think about, is I mentioned to the council last week that if we're concerned about the cost of development in Fairhope, and I don't know if we are, I really don't. I honestly don't know if this body is or anybody is. I'm doing some research. I'll get the bulk up to you. But right now, it's about $3,500 just in entitlements more than Daphne. That's the impact fees, that's whatever. Then work with me on the math on what the I'll call it the gravity sewer tax is. The units are either 2,200, 3,800, whatever. Multiply that by 5, and the city expects the development to spend up to $10,000 to $15,000 per lot for the gravity sewer bias, which is, once again, it's not right or wrong. It's in the ordinance. The ordinance says very clearly that we prefer gravity sewer. I'm not arguing that. It also says there's cases where low-pressure sewer is acceptable. Very clear. Our engineers aren't idiots. They do the math. They show it. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute because there's some other stuff going on here that y'all need to address. Take that $15,000, amortize it in your house. That's a $100 a month payment before you've even done anything. Now, does anybody care about that? That's my first question. If we don't, let's go do just what the article says not to do. Try and slow down growth by slow down regulation and use utilities, and see what the cost of housing is 5 years from now. Now, here's where it gets weird. This function on the sewer issue, which I've insinuated is a unpublished sewer moratorium, and it really is not right. If there's a sewer moratorium, say it, but don't use regs to slow these things down. There was a development on County Road 13, 22 unit duplex development that got killed last week. Now, does anybody care? That's a stick-built plain apartment for plain people that went away because of this silliness. Does anybody care? I mean, I'm asking you guys. This
went away because of what?
Because of this silliness. Let me tell you what happened.
Well, now, what do you mean? What's silly?
The silliness. Let me explain the silliness.
We're talking about a rezoning.
This is all. They're all related. They all got the same treatment last week. Let me finish my thought. They all got it. Y'all all know how timing sensitive zoning submittals are. They're very time sensitive. We submit them. You know, there's 3 silos that report to y'all now. There's Wayne's silo, Richard Johnson's silo, and Mr. Peterson's silo. 2 of them got straight A's. I commend these guys. They gave us specific stuff. Everybody responded. I've talked to the other engineers. They've got the same exact pattern. The utility guys just couldn't get around to giving a specific response. You get out a week away, and they say, get a waiver. That's not good process. That's not good service. And we pride ourselves on good service in Fairhope. That's horrible service from the utility side. It killed that development. Larry had to leave, but he could be the one to tell you. They pulled it because so we lost 20, does anybody care? We just lost a 22-unit development last week because of the utilities not being able to respond to a black and white ordinance. It's black and white. And we've asked repeatedly for specifics. We never got it. Our case got pushed to next month because the utility department didn't do their job. Here's my last issue, and then I'll shut up. In the old regime, when I came up here, any of us came up here, I would look up here and I'd see there's the public works director, there's a utility director, and usually a council person. And I said, well, we know what's going to go on here, whatever the mayor wants. It hit me like a lightning bolt. What's wrong with the utility director being part of this body? What if they're recommending against something? I'll say it out loud. I think we had bad service from the utility department. Should he be ruling on something that he didn't do well? Second part of that is, what if there's a controversial case that he's got to provide utilities to? Sir?
He's asking where this is going when we're talking
I'm asking that the utilities director should recuse himself from these issues, because the last part is a lawyer would call this grading your own homework. He's going to make a recommendation for a commercial service that the city provides and then adjudicate it. Just think about that for a minute. It's not a good model. So that's my point. Thank you.
I disagree. I think I like having somebody up here
who
traditionally that knows more about the water and sewer than us insurance agents.
Wait. No, and I don't want to debate you. We don't have time for that. But we could maybe have a meeting somewhere and we could debate it all day long.
Yeah, thank you.
But you're making it very, you're to me, you're oversimplifying it. Don't stand up, sit back down there.
Because y'all don't know what went on the last couple of weeks, Art. That's what, you don't know the back and forth that everybody went through, all the engineering firms, just to get a crazy denial at the last minute. That's not good.
But what I'm saying is you're oversimplifying it, that Richard can just pull magic numbers out of the air with an antiquated system that we've got and not knowing whether we've got the capacity to do what needs to be done.
All we ask is for him to specifically tell us how we didn't meet the ordinance, and he couldn't.
Just because you meet the ordinance, that doesn't mean that we're not in a situation where the ordinance takes precedent over the capability of the system to handle it. That's my only thing.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a quick comment? Listen, I mean, I think it's absolutely wrong to be criticizing people on this body who dedicate their time. There are some growing pains here. I mean, there are some growing pains here. We're going, and that's what I told Richard, we're going through some growing pains. And in 2 or 3 months, when everybody knows, I mean, because listen, I mean, those specs have been out there, I don't know how long, at least 10 years. I can't say what happened before, but I don't think, I mean, we see projects, and I'm not passing blame on anybody or any entity or anybody else, but there are times when they weren't followed. That's just a matter of the fact. I mean, that's just it. We're trying to, again, look at what's on the books. I mean, we're not making this stuff up. It's written in the books. It's written in the subregs. I mean, I'm going to defend Richard because I think he's got a big job. I mean, one of the most important things in a city is the sewer. My gosh, I mean, look, you read all the stories from the turn of the century when sewage is flowing in the street. It's very, very important.
Especially overcapacity sewer.
Exactly. So, I mean, and I understand Mac's position, and we've talked about that, but this is an extremely serious issue that we're having to get our hands around some of the past practices and what the current practice will be, and that takes some time to get our hands around that, and I think we're doing that. Just now, if you didn't get a turnaround within a week, I mean, again, we're going through some growing pains, and I think as we move forward, it'll be much more detailed as far as, this 500% waiver or 503% or 510, whatever it is. I believe that we're, again, just getting our arms around it. This is the first cycle we came off of. That's right. From the moratorium.
That's right.
And so we want to make sure we do it right, and that's all that we can control is what we do on a daily basis and what the ordinance required. And we want to make sure that things are following the rules.
I mean, why should I vote for this zoning request?
I mean, to me, I see it separate. I mean, zoning is separate. I mean, they can't do it. I mean, with the subdivision, they have to meet this condition or have this sewer issue addressed. I think as far as zoning, the zoning's compatible with what's adjacent to it and so forth. Again, it's up to your call, and we will fully comply with whatever this planning commission decides. And if you decide to table it, then we'll bring it up next month, and we'll work with the engineer and the applicants to try to get the situation, get our arms around it, rectify it, and see what's, and go from there with it. From my perspective, I don't see how that's going to be a negative factor for a rezoning decision.
Okay. Are we still in public hearing?
Yeah, we're in public hearing. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. If you'll state your name and your address, please.
Hi, my name is Effie Thompson, and I live at 18182 Woodland Drive, so right on the red and white dotted line. So I'm going to speak to the zoning, because that's what's on the table now. I'm, like the gentleman said before, did not receive the information about this and found this out about an hour prior to this meeting, so I'm not as educated on this as probably I should be, but I'm a little confused what the tourist resort district zoning is. Like I said, I was told that it could be rental property.
I can give a quick answer to that.
That would be great.
This is not to be confused with the actual tourist and zoning, tourist and resort zonings that are in the city limits, like around Mobile Avenue, where it's actually set up for motels, restaurants, etc. This is a special zoning that was made basically for that one location. It was, rather than that whole location be done in a PUD, it was a special zoning, and it actually has you know, you can go to the city and Emily can, you know, email you a copy of that actual zoning itself of what it allows and what it does not
Okay,
allow.
but just keep in mind that that whole area, a lot of it is single family, which is what we were just talking, or what y'all discussed in some previous items. So, and we have.
And that's what they're looking for
Okay,
here.
is the single family?
Yes.
Okay, so
Correct.
it's not a rental.
No.
And then also on top of the sewage issue, and I don't know if this is a zoning issue, but also the water runoff in this area that's been happening. And I know that the golf course is a natural green space. And so don't know where, and I don't know if that's a zoning issue, but where the water would run off to.
That comes under the subdivision
Okay.
as well. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Anybody else wish to speak to this item?
Is there a zoning, I mean, is there a sewage problem, capacity problem in Fairhope?
I don't know, Matt. That's
I mean,
that's another issue, and you're out of order. We're discussing this now. We can go to McSherry's Irish, well, they're closed on Monday. We can go somewhere else and discuss this all night tonight and every other issue, but we need to stay on this so we can get out of here tonight. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hi, I'm Shelley West. I'm at 159 Mulberry Lane, and I'm directly across the site that's marked there. But just have a question on the zoning, because in the zoning ordinance, Section 8, the TR zoning, the application, it says that there needs to be traffic study. And I didn't hear anything about traffic study. Stormwater management plan is also included in that. And I'd like to know about those things as well.
I can let Tim speak to that. That's where I was talking about, it's not going to be anything they did in the original traffic study. And, but I'll let Tim address this.
Okay.
Tim Wally, HMR. Like Nancy was saying, back when the original TR district was created, I believe the total density was 637 units, somewhere in that neighborhood, 6-something. We're probably looking at complete total build-out in the 400s now, and a traffic study was done for that area and approved by this body for the 637 units. And we have submitted everything, like I say, we are talking about the zoning, but in regards to subdivision regs, we've been through that whole process with the city review, and obviously are recommended by staff for approval, minus the sewer items.
I have something to say about that.
Well, let's keep working through the
we have more.
public hearing,
Sorry.
close the public hearing and move on. And Shelley, what he was saying, a traffic study was done originally. A traffic study and a water runoff study were done originally back years ago when this was going to be 600 and some odd units. They shut down. They were originally going to do more towers, and they cut some of the towers out and are doing more single-family residential. So that's actually lowered the density since the traffic study was done by close to 200.
Was that with or without the apartment?
The apartment complex is not part of this. That's a
But
separate.
that affects the traffic.
By the way, for those of you who don't understand what a traffic study is, traffic studies do not say the traffic is too dense on this road, you can't allow the development. The traffic study simply addresses ingress and egress, whether you need a turn lane coming in, an accelerate lane going out. It doesn't actually say, as a lot of people wish they would, there's too much traffic on County Road 3 or too much traffic on Battles Road, therefore we're not allowing these additional units. It simply says, do we need a turn in, do we need a decel lane? Yes, sir, if you'll state your name and your address, please.
I'm David Lemons. I live at 635 Carolina Court, which is just due south of this development. And I may be speaking to the wrong item here, if the other one's going to be postponed, but my concern is associated with traffic. Is that this item or the next one?
It's got to do with zoning, so you can certainly bring it up now. Yes, sir.
My only concern is that and I'm not against building on golf courses, I'm not against the zoning, because that's exactly what I did just south of there. My concern is the limited depth of these lots off of Battles Road between the lots and the golf course. Unless the layout of the subdivision is such as where you can get a single common entrance into it. All the subdivisions there, Owl's Nest, Watershed, Battles Trace, our subdivision, the Villas at Point Clear, all have single access points to Battles Road. I'm concerned about the possibility of driveways being just north of a pretty already somewhat dangerous 90-degree curve. And even though they're dual driveways, you're still a possibility of backing out on that road, which you don't have anywhere else out there. And that's my concern. I don't know if that's zoning or if that's layout of the subdivision.
It would be the layout of the subdivision, but it's a good point to bring up now. Yes, sir.
Okay, well,
Good question.
that is my concern.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody else wish to speak to this item?
Ann Miller, I'm just a little confused.
If you could state your address for the, if you could let Emily know your address.
Okay, Ann Miller, 18160 Woodland. When I received the letter, I picked it up the post office, did Fairhope Progressive, excuse me, I had a little bit of a question as to exactly where Fairhope is and where Point Clear is. And I think we're all a little confused with this. I know we don't vote in the Fairhope city elections and we don't get mail delivery. So if this is an annexation into the city of Fairhope and I'm 300 feet from it, I don't understand the difference. Do they get mail delivery if they're annexed into the city of Fairhope? Do they vote into the city elections?
If they're annexed in the city, they would get to vote in city elections.
Do they get?
I can't answer that about mail delivery, but they would get to vote in the city elections, yes.
Well, I don't understand what the difference would be 300 feet apart.
If you're contiguous, you can.
Those of us that live 300 feet from this subdivision, will we also be considered tourist resort district?
No, ma'am.
Is the Colony tourist resort? Why is this one strip with just 6 or 7 homes on it going to be considered tourist resort?
They're looking at bringing
I don't understand that.
They're looking at bringing this into overall zoning that they have for the entire Colony development of 400-plus lots. That's what they're requesting.
Okay, I think we're all confused about the tourist resort thing and why that annexation has been called.
Well, it's a little bit confusing because,
very confusing.
you know, I questioned why it was not done as a PUD originally, but rather than it being done originally as a PUD, it was done as its own zoning. And somebody else could get this same tourist resort zoning theoretically, but realistically, you would have to have a hotel. They would have to build a hotel. They would have to build the hotel on the Mobile Bay. They would have to build a golf course. They'd have to have tennis courts, et cetera. So realistically, this is its own zoning. Why it was done this way rather than a PUD back.
Why is it necessary at all? Why is the zoning, why is this particular tourist resort zoning annex necessary? That's what I'm confused about.
The TR district came out of a court case, and it was very specific. It was, yes. Sorry. The TR district came out of a court case originally, and it's a very specific zoning that is ties to all of the colony, the colony properties that they're looking at. This is just like Azalea at the Colony. Are y'all familiar where that one is?
Azalea Ridge, the extension of Lakewood.
No, this is right on, Emily, what road is that? A section, yes.
Okay.
And it's a 7-lot subdivision that backs up to the golf course. It's identical to that.
Across from the apartments.
Right. The golf course is behind it, but it's a 7-lot subdivision.
It's on Section and Battles.
Section, yes.
Where they only have one house built in the cul-de-sac across from the apartments.
Right. That's what this is.
Yes.
So yeah, don't think of it as tourists, like they're bringing tourists, but they've named their zoning designation there a tourist resort district. But it is, this is a low-rise, single-family proposed.
That's this area he's talking about.
And zoning.
Mr. Chairman, I can add also, just, I don't mean to confuse the issue at all, but if you're an unincorporated Baldwin County in Fairhope's planning jurisdiction, lot width is 100 feet, 100-foot lot width. And that drives a lot of the annexations because they want to do a more dense development than 100-foot lots. And so therefore, if you want a 50-foot lot or a 60-foot lot, it behooves you to annex into the city and get a zoning classification that has a less has a lesser lot width than 100 feet. And that drives a lot of the annexation. That's just kind of the issue, and whether that's good or bad, that's what it currently is.
That's correct. And that was correct. That had to do with the lawsuit about the high-rise building and the mediation that came out of that, and so the high-rise will be the only high-rise there. But lately, the trend has been more to the single-family dwellings, and that seems to be the hot market. I don't think the high-rise condo is sold out yet, and the single-family residential lots and houses are selling like hotcakes out there. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time and turn the meeting over to the commissioners.
No dally. I would like to make a recommendation that we recommend, this plan commission recommends to the city council, case number ZC 17.19, initial zoning of tourist resort district, conditioned on annexation in the city of Fairhope. We recommend the city council approval.
Mr. Chairman.
I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Late.
Yes, sir.
I would recommend that the particular development, I think it's understood it's going to be low-rise, but I recommend that the particular development zone is going to be applicable within this area of the TR be included within your recommendation.
I don't understand that. One more time, please.
Within the, is this thing on?
I could barely hear you.
Within the TR area or district, there are certain development zones. High-rise, mid-rise,
Yes.
low-rise, limited commercial, retail, resort. When land is added into the TR,
I got
the
it.
code contemplates that which development zone is coming in as also be noted on the map. It's understood that it's going to be low-rise, I think. I'm just saying for purposes of the record, that ought to be part of the approval.
I agree, especially since we're separating the subdivision out. Do you understand that?
Let my motion show that that is included.
Okay, so Art's motion is to approve the rezoning subject to this being brought in the low-density residential portion.
Then it's a recommendation to the city council.
Just for reference, they did indicate that on the attached map, which will be part of the ordinance.
Okay.
That it is low-rise.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Lee?
Yes, sir.
When does the discussion about that driveway,
That
when would that come in?
That would come up with the subdivision, correct, Wayne?
Okay.
That's all right. Yes, sir. The actual driveways and locations is part of the subdivision application plat.
Thank you.
And then I'm going to abstain from this and reserve my vote for the city council meeting.
Makes sense. And while we're on the further discussion, I'd say that when you do come back, the drives are something that certainly I'm going to be interested in. I'm real familiar with that area, going back and forth all the time, and even biking there sometime. And I also feel like when you come back with the future subdivisions, I think you need to look at doing sidewalks on Battles Road. Originally, when this was brought to us, we were shown a lot of connectivity via pedestrian, even though one big issue we had with the overall approval of the plan was connectivity was such a big part of our comprehensive plan, and this being a gated community kind of, didn't really fit in with that, but we were shown all sorts of, draw up, kind of semi-photo looking things that showed bike trails going all the way from the golf course at Lakewood coming through here where people would be able to bike all the way from the Grand Hotel to the golf course to the, current swimming pool and tennis courts. And with that, and we didn't, because of that, and thinking there's going to be connectivity throughout the sidewalks, throughout the subdivision, we didn't require sidewalks out on Battles Road, but all of those pedestrian gates are locked all the time. So I really think that, with all of the people there, Battles is not a very good road in that area to walk on with the drop-offs, with the ditches on the, on the west side. I really think y'all need to contemplate doing sidewalks when the next round comes up on this.
I also have a comment that I didn't get to speak on.
Go ahead and then I'll let you.
Okay.
Regarding the traffic study that you had depicted earlier, that you said that was for the 600-plus homes that was in the original plan of the colony, and you said that there's probably about 400 homes that are going to be, but does that include all of the traffic that has impacted Battles Road from Scenic 98 to Highway 98, including apartments, including Point Place and the Battles Trace, and I would think that there would be well over 600 homes that are impacting Battles Road, as well as the sewer and the water runoff.
No, I can answer that. It doesn't address that at all. It just addresses the ingress and egress to this subdivision, ultimately. The apartment had to get its own traffic study.
Okay.
When it came in. Tim?
I'll answer your question first. I'll second what Lee has said. It does mainly just address the ingress and egress into development. As he also stated, we just recently did a traffic study in that area for the addition of apartments, which did take into account the average daily traffic on that road as it currently sits right now. And there were no...
You're wearing a separate hat for another developer, the apartments.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
Just wanted a separate one.
Yeah, this
Sure.
is completely separate.
I'm looking at it from a citizen standpoint, regardless of what developer is aware of the impact that is impacting that road, where there's been more development on that road probably than anywhere in Fairhope in the past 10 years. So I'm just putting the brakes just a little bit, trying to, establish we've got 71 more homes being developed that we're going to look at next.
That's included in the 400 originally. This is just
Right.
phase.
Yeah, the next phase
This
is
additional.
73 lots plus this phase of Camellia will be 7, so 80 lots total
Is that,
between the two.
after the 80, is that the end of the phase? Because we never get the complete comprehensive phase.
I think I provided the master plan of the city, but I can definitely send y'all a master plan. It's,
I never have
obviously,
seen
it's
the
just a
master plan since I've been on the planning
It was put in
commission.
y'all's packet. I think it was about, when was it, 3 months ago, 2 months ago?
Yeah, it was put in with Battles Trace Phase 4. I
Okay.
provided copies of the overall master plan. There were
Okay.
2 different options.
Yeah.
With these 7 lots as well?
No, because those were not proposed at the
Okay.
time. And to your question about the sidewalks, I don't know what sheets are in y'all's plan set, but we are proposing a sidewalk for Camellia along Battles Road, along the frontage there.
Excellent.
And in the audience.
Excellent. The public hearing's closed now. We're in the further discussion. All right, thank you,
Okay,
Tim.
thank you.
All right, I've got a motion and a second to approve the zoning. Any further discussion?
How many other options are there to develop a TR zoning district? Is it all single lot only, or is it condominium, or?
And what types of development are allowed in the TR district? It varies. I think we went there a minute ago, it varies.
Which they've got a thing here that shows in different areas it's single houses, in some areas it's duplexes, in some areas it's low-rise kind of condos, not the 10-story like what's there, but some smaller kind of things that's there. But Emily, would you mind emailing that to since so many of the commissioners.
And what they're proposing is having shared driveways.
They could have development, they'll have a single entrance.
Yes, Rich, I'm going to have Emily send that out to everyone since most of the commissioners are new since the original approval. And I think that'll be a nice thing for everybody to have. Thank you for doing that, Emily. All right. Anyway, I've got a motion and a second. All in favor to approve the recommendation of the zoning to the city council?
Hold on just a second. Does your recommendation include, you just said to approve, you did not say staff recommendation. And then we amended it to say as low rise. But staff recommendation is actually has a condition. So yours is for staff recommendation.
Yes, ma'am.
Got a motion and a second to approve the staff recommendation, and for this to be the low density, under the low density portion of the TR district. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay.
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 We've got 2 nays. Did everyone else vote aye? Okay. The motion passes 6-2 with 1 abstention of Jay. All right, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is SD 1731. Is this that's the one that's being held over till next month? Okay, I was thinking, for some reason I was thinking there was one in between there. All
I
right.
believe Mr. Lawley said a minute ago he was okay with continuing the submitted application.
Thank you, Tim.
All three of them?
Just the two?
They had 3 items, one was the zoning and then 2 on the site plan.
They got, the final plat, or the one we just heard, that's the one, 1731, right?
That's what we're supposed to do it now.
1731, you go,
1729, we're going to be going home.
I'm sorry, what?
And 1729, Battle Street.
And 1729, what about 1730? That a whole different
That's
one?
Cliff Pittman's.
Yes.
Something different.
That's Cliff Pittman's out on Morphy.
Cliffs?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
Yeah,
really? Just turn
it's-
out.
yeah, that-
Morphy on Thompson Hall Road.
Yeah, that was fine.
Let's do that. All righty, next item, G. Let me just say item G, if I'm correct.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll be brief. I know it's getting late, but this is something that I just wanted to introduce tonight and maybe get some public comments through a public hearing process. But what I'm going to request is allow me to go through this, take some comments from the Planning Commission and the public, and then bring it back to the January meeting for final consideration by the Planning Commission. But this is dealing with parking on Greeno. In my time here, about 10 months, I've heard a lot of comments, a lot of questions and concerns about Greeno Road and it not looking like other, strip mall-oriented type developments where parking dominates the streetscape. A lot of empty parking spaces dominate the streetscape. So this is our attempt. Initially, and what I would tell you, I think this is going to be a multi-tiered process as we move forward with this. As you all know, we're also trying to gain some funding to do a form-based code study for Greeno Road, both north and south Greeno Road. And this is sort of maybe a stopgap measure as we go forward. As we saw tonight, we had a development tonight that was, again, would not have been compliant with this, but again, this is not adopted yet. So anyway, just going to go through it, Mr. Chairman. Basically, what we're trying to do is really flesh out the village concept that's been in Fairhope since about 2001. I think the first time I noticed in the comprehensive plan where the village concept was discussed was about 2001. For Greeno Road, there are a couple village areas that have been designated. One has been built, and then on page 2 is a map showing that. And this is a map taken from the comprehensive plan. There is, one, the North Village, which is basically where Publix is right now. That's kind of migrated a little bit, but it's landed where the Publix is right now. That is the North Village that was shown on the comprehensive plan. And then also another village was located at Greeno and Fairhope Avenue, which is probably the most prominent intersection in the city of Fairhope. So our focus is trying to flesh out the goal of the comprehensive plan and trying to realize those goals and those long-term plans through the planning and zoning process. Now, what's interesting about this is in our current ordinance right now, we have 3 village center regulations that have not been used on the zoning map, but they do live in our zoning ordinance. Nobody's chosen to use those yet. And what's interesting is we have one, it's called the CVC, the Community Village Center District, and if you read that, the same parking issues we're talking about is also contained in that district, which is kind of unusual. It's interesting. And so in that district, it talks about parking behind the buildings and bringing buildings closer to the street. And that's approximately 40 acres according to the comprehensive plan and also the zoning ordinance, and about 100,000 to 300,000 square feet of non-residential uses. This is a mixed use, again, a mixed use community village center. The next step down is what's called the NVC, the Neighborhood Village Center. And this is, again, a little smaller one, maybe a neighborhood serving, a commercial serving neighborhood, small little node you would see somewhere. And we see these around the country. You might have a little neighborhood bar or restaurant, very, very small scale, very pedestrian scale, and very, very much supporting neighborhood uses. And then the third part of this building blocks, is what I call them, for the village centers and the village concept, is the VRM, the Village Residential Mixed District, which is, again, intended to create a compact neighborhood with land use arrangements that are compatible with these village centers. And what this means, the village centers would be, again, the center, and then these VRM, Village Residential Mix, would be outside the centers, again, feeding into that center, those center uses, those village center uses. So I think what we have in front of us in our current ordinances, we have the pieces we need to put together to realize this village concept in the city of Fairhope by using these three concepts. Containing in your staff report, you'll see on page 3, the day before Thanksgiving, we went out and looked at a couple of these areas at the Greeno Road, Fairhope Avenue Village Center. We took some pictures, and the pictures are in there. This is taken the day before Thanksgiving of the parking lots in front of some of the grocery stores. And as you can see, we have a tremendous amount of parking that's provided but not utilized. That's in our mind, that's wasteful of use, wasteful of land use there. It could be easily be developed, and again, lessen the need to develop somewhere else in a strip fashion or a leapfrog fashion down the street somewhere. We could concentrate the development at these locations and, again, provide a nice streetscape. But again, what we have is a chronic overparking issue, which basically, traditionally parking is based on the square feet of a single use. And you provide it based on what it says, and there's no consideration given to shared parking agreements or any kind of parking analysis or anything like that. And so which leads us to really a problem of overparking, which consumes areas that could be developed. And again, if you develop these areas, there's no need to leapfrog down the street and have this strip pattern of development. And we've identified 4 places what we looked at, and with the corresponding pictures that show that this is actually ongoing in Fairhope right now. We have a lot of parking that's not being utilized. It's wasteful to that effect. Now the good thing is, I think one of these shopping centers is probably prime for redevelopment. We gave a presentation last week to a group, and we're just talking about retrofitting suburbia. And we showed there's several great examples you can look at where you have these traditional big box stores with parking in the front adjacent to these roadways, and how you can be very, very creative from the development side, and you can create usable, leasable, sellable space in areas that were once designated for parking that's not utilized, but also you can create a great streetscape, great frontage, create a sense of place, a pedestrian scale of development by being creative. And I think we gain 2 things from that. We gain a more attractive village center and attractive interest to the city, but also we're creating places for people to congregate, a pedestrian environment. We're creating a great streetscape, and we're also promoting fully utilizing the land to its fullest potential. In this case, it would be development of those parking spaces that aren't being utilized. They're already receiving runoff. It's already asphalt and with very little return or very little use. So what our proposal is tonight is to really, first piece is the parking, but as we go forward, we'll be bringing other ideas to you. But tonight, what we want to just propose to the Planning Commission is look at parking based on these village centers and then these areas that are outside the village centers. And we've provided a couple of diagrams in here and outline what we feel like would be a logical village center boundary for the Fairhope Greeno Road Avenue, Greeno Road area. And it basically includes some of the large retailers, large box there. And this area we think would be prime for redevelopment to some extent, but also to implement a parking requirement where parking was required to be located exclusively to the rear of the building. So when you drive down Greeno Road, you would see a nice streetscape, nice architecturally done buildings with landscaping, those kind of things. Parking would be to the rear. And you could create, by doing that, you create more space for more of a town center feel. I think many of you have been to these town centers. And it creates a very appealing place. When you bring in mixed use, you bring in a logical place for residences, maybe apartments, maybe condos, those kind of things. You bring them into a place that can help sustain that village center. So you're gaining 2 things. You're providing space for people to live who may not have a permanent home yet, or maybe here for a few years and moving on and what have you. But it serves a dual purpose. It can also provide housing, but also support the village center, which is very important because these village centers and these areas, you have to have the density to make them work. If that doesn't work with low density, they won't be successful. You got to have the concentration of uses there. Another part of our proposal is to require a parking analysis. Rather than saying, okay, you're going to do a grocery store, you're going to provide 200 parking spaces. We want to, or if you want to do an office, then you got to provide parking spaces. We want to look at this from the standpoint of a parking analysis based on the use and the peak time of that use. As we maybe discussed before, most of these uses have varying hours of operation and associated peaks. For example, if you have an office use, the peak is during the daytime. At night, nobody's at work at night usually. If you have a restaurant use, the peak is usually after 5 o'clock. And there's a number of different uses, and I've seen some very good diagrams that show that. I will need to bring that to you so we can show it to you. But what you have is you start sort of balancing the parking with the peak usage of the land uses, which I think is a very important element to not have this series of over parking where you're just providing parking that's only used maybe once a year, and it's very, in my mind, pretty wasteful. But you allow a little more creativity and also maybe a little more analysis on the uses and the synergy of those uses together and what that means from the standpoint of parking demand and pedestrian demand, those kind of things. So we're also saying that as well, that we would like, when these things come forward, maybe allow a parking study or a parking analysis to look at those uses and the peaks we would expect for those uses, so we can reach a parking level that is sufficient to meet the demand but doesn't go overboard with it to where you have a lot of empty parking spaces half the time or most of the time. But again, the main part of this is in this village center, parking would be to the rear of the building. Obviously, the land, the dumpsters, those things would all be screened from view, and we go through that here as well. And also clearly marking pedestrian routes, those kind of things. The next part of the proposal is outside the village centers, and in those areas, to try to make try to distinguish these village centers, we wanted to back off a little bit of the parking. And in the areas outside the village centers, what we would propose is that only 30% of the parking could be on the side and the rest in the rear. So we're opening up a little bit more where you do have parking on the side and parking in the rear, trying to make a distinction between the village center as we go out. And for lack of a better term, we use the term gateway district. That's sort of the gateway in the Fairhope. And the whole effort we're trying to achieve here with this proposal, with looking at bringing in someone to look at a form-based code study for Greeno Road is to improve the look of Greeno, make it unique, give it a sense of place that you're in Fairhope, you're not just any place. And I think we have that within our purview to really make that a neat place, but also making it conducive for quality development and improving the streetscape and improving the pedestrian environment there and making it a pedestrian scale type area. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we're talking about. And again, Mr. Chairman, tonight we're really just looking at comments from the Planning Commission, and also if we could open the public hearing, it has been advertised, and get comments from the public. There may be changes that we would consider and want to make sure we get this right. This is very important when you're talking about land use and property rights and development. That's very important to us. We want to be very careful and considerate while at the same time trying to reach the goals that Fairhope has set for ourselves through our comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd just like to turn over any questions you may have, and again, if we could open the public hearing as it's been advertised and take comments as well from the public.
Okay. I'll go ahead and...
It's a very good piece of work.
Thank you.
I agree. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing for the amendment to Article 4, Section F of the Parking Zoning Ordinance. Anybody wish to speak to that? Yes, ma'am.
Hello. I'm Anna Miller. I live at 257 Wesley Street and also own the property across the street at 211 Wesley Street. And it was good to hear some context for the Planning Commission for the packet that I got earlier. I was going through it and going, what is going on? And I like a lot of the things that I heard. Definitely have some questions, and I'm glad to hear that this will be a longer process so that people can get more involved and more educated about what's going on and have some involvement from the public there. It appears from the maps that I was looking at in the packet that essentially a commercial overlay boundary is being proposed adjacent to my property. And we didn't get any notification about that or anything like that. I'm on the planning commission, list, so I always get the packets, and that's the only reason I knew about it. Probably more people from my street and my neighborhood would be here if they had known that that was there. So that's definitely something to think about as this conversation continues. I would like to know, as it moves forward, how the boundaries are determined and what's the process for approving the boundaries. Let's see, I'm going through my little phone notes here. I guess thinking about, and so it sounds like this is going to be more of a process, so there will be more discussions moving forward where we can get into the nitty-gritty of the details of like what's going to happen on my street and how is traffic going to be impacted and my development options for the property that I own. Is that true?
That is. I'll be glad to answer your questions once you give them all. I'll be glad to address them.
I guess the only other thing for now, well, one other thing would be, I understand not wanting a dominant parking lot, wasteland along Greeno. I agree with that. I will say, I think it's important to balance what the people on the highway are having to see and what the people in the homes nearby are having to see. The idea of seeing dumpsters and parking lots so that people can just enjoy driving by in their car doesn't fully add up to me. And then last but not least would be, I heard you mention on the 401 North Mobile rezone request that you wanted to pay attention to the character of the neighborhood, traffic issues, and you don't want to hinder the single-family nature, the use of the neighborhood, change the dynamic and land use. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because I hope that will also apply to commercial encroachment into my neighborhood and neighborhoods like mine, especially on that side of the of Greeno. Thank you.
Hey, Wayne, let's go ahead and do all, and then you can answer everything at once. Mike, do you have anything to?
What I heard sounded great, but what I was curious about is if we do this and then we have the comprehensive plan, will we have a redo of this, or will this better prepare the comprehensive plan for that? Because the comprehensive plan is coming in a year or something.
Anybody else wish to discuss this? Mr. Clay?
Good evening. Bobby Green, 415 North Greeno is where our business is. I love everything you've presented. But I think as Art and I can both tell you, Greeno Road always seems to be that special exception. If this is such a good idea for Greeno Road, why isn't it a good idea for everywhere else in town? Earlier there was, on the zoning request from R2 to R4, there were several businesses along North Section Street that were shown kind of in a salmon-y orange. And all of those seem prime for, a number of them seem prime for redeveloping over time. It seems like if these standards are excellent for Greeno Road, they might also apply to many of the other corridors. Since Greeno Road's designated as a truck route and the gateway into Fairhope, the scenic route where we divert all the traffic through downtown is truly the corridor into Fairhope. So I would say, sure, I love these ideas, but why wouldn't we extend them to all these major corridors such as Highway 104, Gayfer Street, Morphy Avenue, where all the parking now, like in Dollar General and those two little units on Gayfer Extension to the east, all the parking is in front. And the architecture there is fine on Gayfer Street, but all you see is the parking. And to Ms. Miller's point, there's many places on Greeno Road that may change from residential character. Well, they've changed in character, but they may change by law, by ordinance, from residential to commercial, but they have very little depth to them. And right behind them is R1. If you place all or 70% of the parking to the rear, it has a very negative impact on the neighborhoods on either side.
That's a good point.
But I really do the village centers, because you have to kind of suspend reality to think of the village of Piggly Wiggly, the village of Walmart, and the village of Publix. It's just, village in those three words don't really come together very well. But there are mechanisms, another mechanism in place where if they're redeveloped within the landscape codes, if a percentage of those properties change in character, if they want to do a large renovation, the parking areas have to come into the current code. So you'd see a lot less spaces out there.
That's true. You make some very good points. And I tell you, the one I'd love to see that the most on would be Highway 181, but since most of that area is out of the city limits, same with a lot of the other corridors you mentioned, is we'll have to wait till that gets screwed up and then try to retro fix it afterwards, unfortunately.
I understand.
Can I ask you a question related to that? And it goes
They
back.
come up and
I'm sorry, just real quick. Kudos, good job, and it took a lot of thought to do that. This PUD on Edwards, the 1 acre PUD, which I don't know how they ended up being a PUD without getting a special.
no, it's part of an original PUD. It's that whole strip from Edwards.
Gotcha.
over to
Okay,
Baker.
I'm sorry.
It's the last portion of it.
Got in on the end of it. And since this is a PUD, and parking is not mandated for this PUD to be in the rear, and it is on Greener Road. Now, if any changes come about, are they going to have to be mandated to put parking in the rear if they go to any PUD revisions? Because in the past, people have locked themselves into PUDs in order to be locked into the rules and regs of the day. And they are, even if they go, like with Bones and Babies, when they asked for some PUD revisions to ask the state of Alabama to come in there because it was only supposed to be medical. Under those revisions, if it had anything to do with any additional parking or anything, would they be mandated to put parking in the rear? Or any other mandates that you put on this?
Wayne, you can answer all these questions and more as well. Thank you, Deborah.
I mean, are PUDs legally stuck right there, or can we bring them up to date?
And I'll go ahead and close the public hearing at this time.
To answer Mr. Green's question, basically a PUD is essentially a blanket variance to any of the regulations. So if we had the regulation that says you got to build a 60-story building and have parking on the 60th floor, that PUD could give a deviation from that. So once you get a PUD, that governs. Even if the regulations change, that still governs. I mean, obviously, you would, as you went forward and you wanted to amend it or create a new PUD, you would have to ask for that would have to be part of your PUD to vary from that requirement, but you could absolutely get it approved with reduced setbacks, whatever it could be. So yes, the PUD would govern in those cases, no matter what we regulated, what we required. It would not change the existing development and entitlement rights you have to your property with this. Obviously, if you changed it, it would be a consideration you'd have to make when you're amending your PUD to ask for that waiver, ask for that change. As far as the other question Mr. Miller had about zoning and commercial, the proposal tonight has nothing to do with commercial. All we're saying is, and again, we just use some broad overlay areas. This is primarily geared towards parking only. We're not designating anything a commercial area or anything like that. This is really geared much more towards zoning. I mean, much more towards parking, not land use or anything else. And so as far as the question, what does this mean from a commercial standpoint, it means nothing. The zoning will still be in place, and this will not alter the zoning whatsoever. So if you're zoned residential now, it'll be residential unless you or someone else asks for it to be rezoned. It will have no impact, no bearing on that. Now, as we go forward, and again, this is just one step in that process. I think what we're doing, what we propose tonight, would be consistent with what you would see with a form-based code. If you've been in any place that has form-based code, you'll see that the streetscape is really the dominant feature. They want to have a inviting and nice streetscape, and that's one of the more prominent features you'll see in the form-based codes. Allow also with the flexibility of uses based on form, not based on the use and separation of uses. So to answer that question, this has nothing to do with the commercial or residential or anything else. This just says if you're going to develop commercially along Reno, it has to follow this guideline. Now, we showed some broad categories. This is really more geared towards the corridor itself, not large areas outside the corridor. And that's something we can come back and we can narrow it down and show.
Why don't we look at whether, think Bobby made a good point, whether, I mean, while we're doing it, whether it would be applicable to, you know, a lot of these other corridors.
You know, and that's a great point. We can certainly look at that. If you look at downtown, right now, parking, you know, usually parking is on the streets, on the street side, on the city right of way, and it sort of mimics that. But we can look for other areas. I mean, basically what you're looking at is you're looking at some of these neighborhood centers, village centers at intersections and so forth.
Parking, because, I mean, in downtown, you don't really want somebody on, you know, Section Street in downtown to, you know, put their building in the rear and put parking in the front. It
That's
just
right.
breaks up that.
That's right. But we can certainly look at other areas that are designated in the comprehensive plan for these locations. And now a lot of the things that, like, as you mentioned before, Mr. Chairman, when you go to 181, you have a sporadic, sporadic county, city, so it's really hard to do anything of any meaningful impact there because of just the nature of the area. Some parts are in, some parts are out of the city. Makes it very, very difficult to do that. And the areas that we have that's in the city would be much, much easier, and we'll certainly look at those at the next meeting. Then maybe we can bring those forward and have those discussed as well.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, the next item on the agenda is SD 1730 Fox Hollow final plat approval for phase 2. Preliminary plat approval for phase 2.
Mr. Chairman, this is again a preliminary plat. There's no issues with sewer or anything else. Mr. King reviewed this very thoroughly and recommends approval. I don't believe there's any conditions or anything else. This is kind of an extension of the current Fox Hollow development, and no issues were noted, and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on behalf of the developer? Is that you're with Fox Hollow also, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add to what Wayne said. I'll be happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Okay.
It is gravity sewer.
Yes, it is gravity sewer, thankfully.
Thank God. Anybody here? I'll go ahead and open.
I didn't know you were going to dodge that bullet.
I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Anybody wish to speak to this item? If not, I'll close the public hearing and turn this over to the commissioners.
I had a question about stormwater. There's a comment, or it's referenced that the projected runoff, additional runoff, would be offset by the elimination of one stub street. I've had this question about multiple projects. Are you, is the basis for that runoff the maximum buildable area on each of these lots, or just what is initially proposed, or are you just looking at the road?
The basis for the runoff is typically determined by assumed house size and driveway size, and in a development like this, you probably 5,000 to 6,000 square feet per lot, something like that, plus the roads, plus the sidewalk, curb, and everything else that's impervious. And just so I can clarify, this what you're looking at there, this subdivision was actually approved approximately a year ago, and we've made some slight changes to it and added, I think it's 2 or 3 lots, and we removed about 200 feet of road, and that's what that's referencing, is it basically being a wash by removing the roadway and adding 2 lots.
Okay, so this may be more of a comment for future consideration, just that I have the concern when we start to do that it doesn't prohibit anybody from, in the future, putting concrete over the rest of their lot, building out to the total maximum building area. So the more we hang our hat on, we need to understand what those calculations are, and should they be the maximum buildable area, the maximum impervious area, as we move forward. It's more of a general comment than on your particular case, but it's an ongoing concern, I think.
Okay.
I have a question. Is the common area, or is it a detention pond?
Some of both. There's can you put something up in with that shows the common area down in the bottom far right is mainly a detention pond. The other common area is a detention pond and common area, and I don't know the exact ratio, but I'd say 50-50, 60-40, something like that.
Do you know if they're like stock ponds for common people?
I don't know. You know, phase 1 has a very large wet pond that they've constructed. Now, whether or not they've stocked it or not, I don't have any idea.
Mm-hmm. I'm just looking for green space. I feel like our green space is getting more constricted to more houses, and there's not any place for, I'm sure, it meets subdivision regulations, by golly.
Any further questions for the developer? I would like to say the sidewalk and bridge y'all did on phase one is excellent.
Okay.
Out there. I know we looked at the Single Tax Corporation that looked at running a sidewalk out there, and y'all spent a lot of money on that.
Yeah, they
At some
did.
point, we need to, we being the Single Tax Corporation, need to punch that out to Thompson Hall Road and along Thompson Hall Road to make that area much more pedestrian friendly. But y'all did a real good start on that, and I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I'll relay that to the owner.
I
Any
think
further
y'all did a
questions?
nice job trying to preserve a lot of the trees, too.
No further questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion.
You want a motion? Yes. In the case of SD 17.30 Fox Hollow Phase 2, I recommend approval as suggested by the Planning Commission staff.
I've got a motion to approve, subject to the Planning Commission staff's recommendation, and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. All right, moving through, next item, Southern Light. We have an 115211 review for 708 linear feet of optic cable on the north side of Nichols Avenue.
This is very similar to the other utility reviews we have done. It's 708 feet of fiber optic cable that's basically going to run to that warehouse bakery area. However, they've added a condition that we don't typically add, that the contractor shall attend a pre-construction meeting with the city department heads prior to issuance of a right-of-way permit. There's some significant utilities in the area, and they just want to make sure everything's good.
Anybody wish to speak on behalf of Southern Light? In that case, I'll turn this over to commissioners. Richard, everything look good?
Everything. I mean, they're going up force mains and laterals, so I can't really count. I hope they'll pay for us to get them fixed. We'll find out about that. I'll make a motion to approve for whatever we're doing.
Okay.
With staff
I have a motion to approve
There's 3 recommendations.
UR 1706. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. All right, next item, public hearing, request of the City of Fairhope for Public Utilities to accept Resolution 2017-02, amending Article 6. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Wayne left y'all. I don't know where he went. Wayne, come back. But this is the resolution that y'all discussed last month, that Richard brought forward for amendments to our specs for stormwater. You got anything you want to say?
Anything you want to say about this?
Sewer, I'm sorry.
This was the sewer, the stormwater's the next.
I understand Mac's frustration, and I apologize for that. I would like to think that would be considered one of the more fair people in dealing with these issues than you'll ever find. But obviously, you don't feel that way today, and I apologize for that. The issue that I've got is that there are design criteria, standards that are established in these standard construction specifications, and then there are technical specifications. And when we start dealing with, you know, the design criteria, which is obviously it's gravity sewer, and the design criteria in my mind sets the level of service that is the expectation for this planning commission to review. And because there's technology, and because there's materials, and because there's changes in some of the way that design criteria can be incorporated into a project, the technical side of these things can change, and in particular, we're looking at right now, we have one lift station approval for a suction lift pump station. We have one lift station approval for a submersible pump station, and I'm finding that there's not enough competition to give fair competition among suppliers of that similar equipment. And so I just think it's important that we're able to look at a few options for the technical side of these things. When you get into the SCADA system that we're trying to improve, we need to improve the technical side of these specs so that when we do want to have SCADA equipment installed to operate these lift stations, we're able to insert that without having to necessarily go through the bureaucracy, if I will, and I apologize if that offends anybody, but that there's a level of bureaucracy and time requirements to get those things done that I think it is really unnecessary to address the technical issues that we're talking about doing. We're talking about putting some odor control issues in lift stations. We're talking about, we're going to be doing some cured in place pipelining systems. There may be some options in there that aren't specifically mentioned in here that we want to look at. There's air relief valves that we can look at different options. I mean, there's just things that are not specifically tied to the design criteria, but are called out specifically in terms of specific products that, may or may not be the best use of and accomplish in the best manner what we're trying to accomplish in the implementation of those features. So we're trying to do that. And I back to follow up with some of this now. I came to the Planning Commission first about several meetings ago, and I'm not going to tell you the exact meeting, but I asked for the permission to insert some language about approved equals in the technical specification side of these standards. And there was a comment from somebody who's now not on the Planning Commission that he wanted to see that written down, in terms of some kind of, and validate exactly what that means. And then I went to the City Council and I offered a proposal about design of the equipment specs that were approved and the ability to use some of that alternate equipment on a trial basis, and asked for direction on how to go about looking at changing these things. And I haven't gotten any real direction that I'm aware of other than people's opinion. And so then I came back to the Planning Commission and I said, well, I think this resolution, talking to Ken, we think if we secure the design criteria with the Planning Commission oversight, so that standard that we established and that level of service that we want to afford to people who are going to be buying these houses and living in these places, that we feel comfortable that that's the best level of service they can get. And that's just not sewer. I mean, that's water, that's stormwater design, that's road design, that's sidewalks, that's the level of everything else you put on the building, whether it be height restrictions or parking, it's everything. And I hate it that it's come down to where just this one little issue that's been kind of put on the back burner for so long now, it's become almost a rubber stamp issue to everybody lately, and it's just not the way it needs to be. And so in looking at your first cost estimate, you had a lift station that was valued at about $65,000, which I thought was relatively high. And it was 400-something% of the value, but you and Larry decided that, well, it was in a sensitive area and it shouldn't be allowed. I said, well, let's look at putting it on the road. And then we put it on the road. And then the lift station cost went from $60-something thousand to $128,000. And so I said, well, that doesn't even, and everything that was on there was just extremely vague, and I didn't see Tim's cost estimate, but I'm guessing that it wasn't much different because there was no plan to look at to compare the cost to anything. And so it's just difficult for me to try to look at what we're trying to accomplish. And I know, Mac, you can frown about it if you want to, but it's just the fact.
Well, Richard, I'll put all these in writing in specific. I appreciate that. This is the most information we've gotten from you. And we've not gotten nothing we've gotten nothing in writing. We've gotten.
I laid out a sewer plan and sent to Larry.
I wish you were here, because but let's not do that. I had some questions about this particular issue, because I apologize about losing my temper a little while ago. There's a process that we think's not being adhered to, and we would like to illustrate that. That's by the book. So the regs are the regs. We read the regs. Y'all administer the regs. I know we're going to lose. I just want y'all to understand what's going on. The question I have about this particular public hearing, because I know that's what we're asking, we've submitted something. There are several cases that are submitted under the regs that were enforced when they were submitted. If you change the technical regs between now and when they're approved, under what guidance do we operate under? That might be a question for Ken. If you change the technical regs tonight, does that affect our submittal?
Any changes tonight, you would go into the prior since you
The prior, okay. All right, the second question that Larry and I both read the new regs, and we didn't, this is a question for y'all with transparent government, we would request that any reg change in the future highlight what the change is. We're not dummies. We read them this afternoon. I said, is that in the new one? And the answer is, well, lay them side by side. Good government would say that you would highlight the changes. I would ask y'all to do that before you adopt something.
Most of them have done that. This is a separate.
Okay, but I'm just saying, I read it, and there's some interesting stuff in there. The last comment, and I'll sit down, is I was, when you were looking over here and saying we got sewer issues, is there a sewer issue? We just approved 57 new houses, so there must not be a capacity issue. There must be some concern about conveyance. That's my question. Is there a sewer capacity issue in Fairhope?
When it rains hard, there damn sure is one.
What's that?
When it rains hard, there is one.
Okay, does that mean, what does that mean for designers and everybody else? Should they, because right now I think there's a de facto low pressure moratorium, 4 projects I've seen that were shut down.
There's always been a de facto low pressure moratorium.
Much better when it comes
Well,
to
There's always been one. It's written right here that gravity.
No, a moratorium means that we got this kind of response last week, which basically requested us to make an illegal request for a waiver that would have killed the project. What I don't know what that means.
But you quoted all the regulations that meet your requirements that you wanted to meet, but there's also requirements for deviations in here that we can offer deviations to everything we're talking about.
If we had heard that 2 weeks ago, we would
work together.
If we had heard that 2 weeks ago like we requested, we'd be fine.
And that's about 2 weeks after I laid out a gravity option for Larry to give us some reasonable cost estimates on to look at.
Max, let's not go back and forth until after the meeting. Let's stay on resolution.
Yeah, let me ask you.
2022.
This came up in the council meeting, and, we're authorizing, the way I understand it, is that we're asking the Planning and Zoning Commission to authorize Richard as Director of Operations to revise the construction standards within the standard specifications. Who currently has that authority? Who are we taking it from and giving it to Richard?
Arguably this commission. And so rather than him have to come to the commission to make a change because a new valve comes on the market that we might want to be using in those technical construction specifications, they're get way down the list.
Ken, get to the microphone, please.
I don't think that one works, Mr. Dye, so I'll just stand up. Rather than have this commission get down in the weeds, these very technical construction specifications, write down the type of valve and who makes the valve, that authority would be vested. It's silent, the regulation is silent about who can do that now, since they're part of the subdivision regulations. I conclude probably that power would be vested in the commission itself. So that's being changed to vest in the Director of Operations the ability to make changes in the specifications only on the technical construction side. The design side, whether it's a gravity flow and other features, as more policy-based considerations will remain subject to change only by this commission.
But when we are adopting policy changes, don't those ultimately go to the city council?
These are part of the subdivision.
Not if they're the subdivision regulations. Zoning.
I'm just trying to make sure we don't vote on something here that is ultimately undone because it should have been somebody else voted on. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I'm not here to offer anything other than look. I'm just asking for people to tell me.
No, and I'm just trying to make sure we're the wrong body in voting on it. I mean, I don't see any problem with it either way. I just want to make sure we're dotting the right i's.
An obligation of the developer to comply with the standard specifications for construction of sanitary sewer and water facilities is part of the subdivision regulation.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Emily, you want a motion for us for this to move the resolution?
Technically, never opened the public hearing.
Oh, I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anybody wish to speak to this? I will say one thing. I think a lot of these ideas that the staff members are bringing up are absolutely excellent. I think because the prior staff, had certain areas that they let slip by, doesn't mean that, the new staff can just say, oh, it's the regulation, but, we're told the prior staff didn't look at those few items, so let's just do the same thing ourselves and fall in line. I mean, if it's in writing and it's your job, it puts you between a rock and a hard place, and you have to have some, appreciation for that. And I can tell you, if you're patient with Richard, the items he's doing and looking at updating are absolutely excellent and are going to take Fairhope, to the 21st century, where we're probably not even to the 20th century yet in a lot of these sewer items with our terracotta pipes.
And one of the things I'll tell you, that comes up a lot with us, and it's come up several times in here, is that one of the things that a lot of people are looking for is just what Mr. Dye said, is they're looking for consistency. Mm-hmm. They want to know what the rules are. They want to know, they want to be able to know what the outcome is without having to show up to the meeting, because it should be. And if there's something that's been on the books that we haven't been enforcing, and there's
you need to enforce it or take it off the books.
We should be enforcing it.
You don't enforce it or take it off the books.
That's it. That's right.
Mr. Chairman, and that's kind of my point. I don't want to sound like we're pointing fingers at previous people, because they all did a fantastic job. I mean, Fairhope's a beautiful place. That didn't happen by accident. So we don't want to be pointing fingers at former staff members, whomever else. I mean, I think they did a great job. Things do change, and ways of doing things change, and some things are more prominent at times than others. And so I just want to make that clear. We don't mean to point fingers at other people or anything else. And we all have our issues we deal with, and some things we do better than others, and some things they may have done better. And I just want to make sure everybody knows we're not pointing fingers and trying to cause issues that way, because we have a great deal of respect for the former staff members.
Question for improvement in processes. When this came up last week, we basically had a non-response to our submittal that's been in front of, one of them's been in front of y'all since February. And the question I had to Wayne is, what do we do? And he said, I don't know, maybe you need a waiver. And basically, the authority y'all have, if the process is flubbed, our recourse is to come get emotional with you or complain, or go to circuit court. And there ought to be another mechanism to, there's just some specific things we'd love to discuss with Richard President about what could have been better in these processes. But right now, it's this, as I say, we got basically a recommendation for an illegal waiver 3 days ago. And I thought, what does that do? Does that just get us kicked out? So I'd like y'all to think about that. How does, if the process isn't working well, what can the applicant do other than I'll put it off a month and feel like it doesn't matter? I mean, once again, y'all got all the marbles. Let's understand that.
Well, and I would just offer to you the same thing I said a little while ago. There are issues that I anticipate this commission and staff will get our hands around that are issues, and they will be issues, but in order for us to be consistent in how we deal with them, it's going to take a little bit of time. They didn't build, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it sure wasn't torn down in a day, but it's going to take us a little bit of time. Now, I know you are upset because you've got some projects that you feel like have gotten shuffled around and you can't get a straight answer, but I can, and I'm sure, Mac, that's probably an understatement as far as you're concerned, but I would just offer to you.
We need to stay on this point.
Well, but let me
talk to Matt.
No, I know, but let me.
The meeting,
I know, but let me just. The question is when this is related to this. When there is an issue, how do you address it? That's the question I was asking.
Okay.
All right, I've got I have closed the public hearing. Anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I moved it. We adopt resolution number 2017-02.
I second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
I'm not going to vote on that, by the way.
Richard's recusing himself on that, so one abstention. Do we have any older new business?
We still have one more.
I have the resolution.
I have a second resolution.
-3.
The LID,
That's put up to
we've
next.
asked that to be continued, yes.
That's put up to next month because Buford's in charge of that. One item I
No,
would.
we have to have a public hearing.
We've already, Mr. Chairman, we've scheduled the public hearing, so I guess we have to open it, I suppose, and continue it.
Okay. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing for the LID changes. Basically, for anybody watching on television, what these are to do is basically to try to put some quantitative, some quantitative numbers and figures on the.
And just in a nutshell, and Buford is taking a final exam tonight, and so, but he is has drafted this and has spent a great deal of time doing this. Basically, what we're trying to do is go to outcome-based LID requirements. Not saying the old way was bad, but right now you got to do certain ones. We're saying you can do whichever ones you want as long as you meet the outcome is X. And I'm not a stormwater engineer, so I don't know what X is.
So how do you know what that outcome is until it's developed?
The 80% total system installers, I think, that is the limit. We had it in the regs previously, but what they're doing is, when Jonathan wrote it, he had listed specific LID that you had to do. Now they've rewritten it so that they're just saying, you've got this requirement, you still have to meet this requirement, but we're going to leave
We don't care how you do it, just.
Well, we're going to leave it up to the engineers.
As long as it meets the Alabama handbook, LID handbook. There's a handbook that has detail.
That would save us a lot of.
But the LID handbook has specs and so forth, and drainage coefficients and all those things I don't know anything about. It's contained in there, so you have a sort of the guidebook. The handbook becomes the guide, and again, the main thing we want to see is the end result is going to be 80%. How you get to that point, it's your choice.
And the one thing I want to make sure all the commissioners are familiar with is the LID has nothing to do with the total volume of the water. It has to do with the treatment of the water. We need to remember that. A lot of people get confused in those two issues, like with that apartment case that got thrown out. A lot of the people down, river were thinking because the LID, there were questions. Of course, if you remember, you asked the question, they went through the LID 1 through 18 of which ones did and didn't. So it was certainly vetted, but the LID has nothing to do with outflow. It's simply the cleanliness, not the volume of outflow. One thing I would like to say while we're here, I've got a PhD in Cowpen Creek. I'm driving by Fairfield Lake and how much water comes up, and depending on how low the lake is, how much rain we have, how quick we have it, whether the tide's high, tide's low, wind's north, wind's south, and I know when to move my boat and when not to. And I'm saying this for a reason, not just to talk about myself and brag about my, genius. But the last rain event, we had a 4.5-inch rain. And I was sitting comfortably watching television, and one of my sons said, "Dad, I hear the creek raging out back." And I said, "Son, I just looked at the rain meter. It was only 4.5 inches." Well, that 4.5-inch rain got the creek out of the banks under my boathouse, and I had to swim into the boat that night and retie it up. And bottom line, I've never had the water come out of the bank before in less than an 8.5-inch rain event. The reason I point that out is the only difference between that rain event and the one that we had a little less than a year ago, it actually was close to as much as a 10-inch rain event, is the county went out and with that funding has opened up all the culverts again. The reason I say that is so when you get chewed out for the developments and how much the developments are creating water runoff, remember that the only issue in water runoff doesn't have to do with subdivisions. Most of these subdivisions, because of how inexpensive retention ponds are anyway, actually slow the water down more, and the net effect is positive. Those culverts being opened up was a game changer. The next time we have a 9 or 10 or 11-inch rain and people come complaining, let them know that there's a double-edged sword with those culverts being opened up. On the one hand, certainly it's better for safety. People won't hopefully die in car crashes as much. But on the other hand, all those culverts being closed down were working as water retention and backing the water up in the farmers' fields and in people's yards and in some cases people's houses. So just know that when you fix one person's problem up river, you're hurting somebody else downriver, and just remember that, because that's
hydraulic event.
That's something that's very interesting, and I'm going to be interested to see our next 9-inch event. But that's the end of my soapbox. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I do.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Oh, we had a motion in a second. I thought we did vote.
To continue?
We had to vote on what?
To continue?
To continue the LID discussion until the next meeting.
Oh, okay, I'm moving, we continue the LID discussion until the next meeting.
Oh, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Excuse me.